Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn and another episode of Dissident Dispatch. I am really glad you're here this evening. We've got a great show for you. And I would like to ask you to please go ahead and, if you're not already subscribed, hit that button to subscribe to the channel and also click the like button to. I'm hearing my own self. Hold on a second. Like the show so other people can join us live in the comments. I am joined this evening by Rhyen Staley, who works with Parents Defending Ed. And a bit about Rhyen, he's 15-year veteran of the classroom, also a professional researcher for Parents Defending Ed now. How many years is it?
Mhm.
3 years
For
going
years,
on?
yep, 3.
Okay. And so you've been really up to your eyeballs in studying what's not just, from having been a teacher, but studying what's going on in the schools. And I asked you here because I came across, Erica's post about Erica's outreach director at Parents Defending Ed, the Corrupt Ed report that you guys put out. And I really want to talk with you about it. But before I do that, I want to show people your site. I want to show people
That'd be great.
Parents Defending Ed because I think it is really important for people who are not aware of your organization to become aware of this organization. You guys have been around quite a while. I mean, really since I started. I think Parents Defending Ed I started in 2020 and I think they did as well, right?
About I think the summer of 2021.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I just remember like Parents Defending Ed has been a fixture in terms of,
Mhm.
people focusing on this. Now I've watched the organization grow and put out some amazing research. So parents, if you're not already following this organization, if you're not already signed up to get, newsletters and notified when they do reports like the one we're about to go through tonight, I really I urge you to do that, especially if you have children in public school. Now, if you don't, you still, in my opinion, need to follow because you're paying taxes.
Mhm.
So remember, I tell you all the time, we all have skin in this game. I don't have kids in the school system, but I'm paying the taxes just the same. So you need to know what is going on in these schools. It's also relevant because, of course, we have an election coming up and education is going to be a big topic. It already is. And you should know what's really happening because I've already noticed the politicians are talking about things that actually aren't happening and they're not really talking about things that are. So these are the go-to folks for
Mhm.
what's happening in public school. So having said all that, anything you'd like to add about the organization before we kind of talk about how the report came to be and dive into that?
Yeah, I work with a fantastic team, and we have different things that we do, and we do some lawfare, and we have lawsuits, like for example, Title IX against the Biden administration. We have another set of parents where they do outreach and they do training sessions with parents and work with small parental rights groups around the country and so forth. And we have as much fun as you could have as doing the work that we're doing, right?
Yeah.
But we have such a great team together, and we just want to educate parents on what's going on. I mean, that's you're thank you for showing our site, because that's the part of the point of it. Is we have so many resources on there, not just the bad things. We have what things mean, ethnic studies, what is that? How to address your school board, how to write FOIAs, Freedom of Information Acts, and things like that. And so, I would tell parents right now that if you have concerns or you have questions, there's a way to contact us through our website and get a hold of us. And if you have things you need to share, or just need help navigating something that we might be able to help you with, if we can't, we'll get you to who can.
That's right.
So,
And it's really, really well organized. You can follow along with the lawsuits if that's of interest to you. If you want to look at the indoctrination map and see, what's going on in
mhm.
your state and, find other parent groups, resources, private school resources, their videos. I mean, it is, and I've really been impressed. I've watched the organization grow like since its inception, where it was small, just kind of like sign up, tell us about your school. It was more like receiving information. And now you guys are producing an enormous amount of content that is kind of like what I cover here, guys, in terms of high level. Hey, guess what? This is happening. Let me digest a little bit for you in video form. This is where you go to get the deep dive that explains it all, and in a way that you can, take with you to other people. So, if there's a flow chart for how you should get your information, if you're the kind of person who's just kind of like, I don't know what I need to pay attention to, sure, watch videos like mine or other people's, but you got to go here to get the beef. Okay.
Eh,
This isn't what I do. What I do is more digest.
And I would add to that you've had some fantastic guests on that, mutual friends of ours who have really done great work on the philosophical and theoretical and all the pieces that we'll get into a little bit today. What we also try to do is give parents what it looks like boots on the ground. What do
Yep.
these things look like? And we'll get into this, I assume, where it's like, okay, it goes from up here. How is it in my kindergartner's classroom? And so hopefully we can digest that a little bit. But
Right.
that's what we try to do there is we try to show that the things that are happening in your child's classroom and then obviously you have the other guests that complement like where it came from to
Right.
how it gets manifested.
Exactly. And that is important because I do try to hang out in the realm of philosophy probably more than the classroom stuff, mostly so that people can get so solid in the ideas
Hmm.
that it will jump out at them when it is in the classroom. So, there are just certain fundamental questions to ask. And if you see a lesson and you're like, this doesn't make sense to me in the context of those questions, you right away know there's a problem. So you don't have to memorize every last little thing. You just have to have the basics of what is it that I want my kids to learn and know about themselves and about the country and about the world. And then, go from there. So I try to take it maybe from like 30,000 foot, Hegel and Marcuse, whatever, down to, okay, you need to know who thinks they're God in
Right,
the classroom. Do they think it's the state, or do they think it's actual God or something else, whatever.
right, right.
Okay.
Totally.
So having said all that, let's go grab the actual report and bring that up. This is what it looks like. This was published August 8th, so I'm a little late getting to it. Sorry. But I've talked about this subject, Ryan, before on the channel. I talked about the poison ivies, one of which I went to, University of Pennsylvania. I talked about Columbia and Harvard. They do kind of set the standard, do they not? Even though it branches out to everybody else, do people look to them?
I think it depends. It depends really. I mean, there are so many players in this space that have influence,
Mhm.
right? I think Stanford is one. You have to look at these universities that are maybe a little bit more on the pushing this stuff out as opposed to creating teachers. So I think that yeah, when you're looking at the high level end of it, you're talking Columbia's Teachers College. Which, by the way, we found out some information on a story today about a woman with Hochul's office and so forth, and apparently she attended Columbia. So
The
there's
Chinese
that piece.
spy.
Yeah, yeah. So it is weird how that all kinds of ends up coming back to the same. That's kind of my thing, by the way, Deb. Is like it's kind of like a Marvel or a DC movie where the at the end of the day it's the same handful of bad actors, kind of pushing the same stuff. And so for one, I'm sure you've talked about this plenty, but Linda Darling Hammond. And so a lot of this stuff ends up coming back to her pushing this stuff through. So yes, Ivy Leagues, Stanford, I'm trying to think of others. And then, the small schools just kind of, they want to keep up with the big dogs. So they just kind of mimic and do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been what I've seen to, greater or lesser degrees in terms of how much of the syllabus is covered. And we'll go into that in your report.
Hmm.
Now, another question I have for you before we get into this is, well, it's really a request. Would you please explain to the audience what you mean by teacher pipeline?
So it's the teacher pipeline is it's actually we're starting to see it start in the K-12 schools, and what they're trying to do is understandably, recruit kids into becoming teachers. I wouldn't say it's probably grossly popular at the K-12 schools, but like anything, right? You have a vocational program that's trying to recruit, ROTC, they're trying to recruit kids in. So they're starting this off in K-12. And one of the things parents will see is the grow your own programs, where they're trying to quote diversify their teacher population, which is not ultimately a bad thing, depending on what you mean by diversity. But you and I know, what we know that they don't necessarily mean diversity of thought. And so it starts there, but then they're trying to push those kids into the colleges of ed. And then they get into the colleges of ed, and this teacher pipeline goes all the way up to doctorates. So within our report, um, we I included in those that helped me on this, we included syllabi from the full range, all the way from undergrad up to doctorate programs, because your administrator at school, or even I've worked with some where I worked with teachers who were in the process of getting their doctorate in education. So the teacher, your child's teacher, could be taking these doctorate courses. And then I can tell you, a teacher, and she, as a human being, she was a wonderful person, but I could tell you in hindsight, she was incorporating what she was learning in her doctorate program into her classroom. She was teaching junior lit, and she was teaching the students the Crucible, and she was already injecting feminist theory and queer theory into the discussions in the classroom, because I could hear across the hall about the patriarchy and colonizers and this and that. So that's kind of how that stuff happens. And what we focused on with this report was how this a lot more of these schools are now turning these teachers into activists. That is actually their mission statement for a lot of these schools. We highlight that with Portland State especially.
Right.
But I've been kind of eyeballing other schools, like their mission statements. And by the way, I don't want to make this political, but just to illustrate a point, is a couple of weeks ago, the Harris campaign had a rally was it Las Vegas or out in Nevada, and there was a teacher that got up, and the teacher said, not verbatim, but she said that she's a social justice warrior, or she's all about social justice, and so. Right there, she proved to us that what their focus isn't about teaching these kids reading and math.
She actually said, if I recall correctly, and again, I'm paraphrasing too, that teaching was the ultimate act of social justice. That was the best way to fight for social justice. And I think she even said that two of her daughters are also teachers. So she's even brought the family into it. And I've told people on this channel many times that even back in 1989, in my grad school program, my teaching program for graduate school, I was told that teaching is a political act, that the purpose of education is social justice. And that's how far back it goes for me. I know before the show started, you mentioned you wanted to talk about that as well, how far back this goes.
Right. Well, in 2007-8, I went back into a master's program, and it was a dual thing. It was a master's and a certification programming. And at the time, the school, it was a small Jesuit private school. So Jesuit's a form of Catholic, for those that may not be fully familiar. And they were under accreditation process to get reaccredited by NK, National Council Association of Teacher Educators, right? And they were revising their mission statement. So this is 2007 for me, and I can remember that the mission statement was to be a transformative social justice educator, right? So even back then, the language that we now know, because we've done, those of us, especially those listening to your channel, they've been learning the theoretical foundations of all of this stuff. When they hear transformative social justice educators, they know exactly what that means. And so it was, even back then, this stuff was filtering in. And then my first job, right there in 2008, in our professional development room, on the wall is Derek Bell. So this stuff was
Founder
starting to
critical race theory, for those who are unfamiliar.
Yes. So that stuff, and Derek Bell does pop up a couple times in this report, not enough to really warrant like pulling his data out and type of thing, but it's definitely his work is also in these courses.
Right. So looking at the stats that you have, that you when you see the numbers, the total number of states, that's the number of states you looked at, right?
Yes.
Okay, so all
Well,
of these are,
let's back up. Just to be fair, like this was not necessarily the most scientific method, right, for doing this. I mean, really, it was a search and find.
well, it's an
I was
inventory. You were taking an
Yeah,
inventory. And I
yeah,
think
just to get
it may
a
not be,
survey.
yeah, but it's still that's what we all do. I mean, how do you really find out if something is widespread? You take inventory. You just take a look and you sort of
Yeah.
survey things. I think it's safe to assume if this is what you find on a basic search,
Hmm.
that it's probably more. I mean, in other words, if you didn't have to work too hard to get 34 states, 6 7 universities, whatever, and find all this information, I would suggest that the audience extrapolate out from that and assume it goes farther than this. That's my personal opinion, even though that's
Yeah,
not
totally.
scientific.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so I happened to doing my search parameters and everything. I happened to get that many states.
Yeah.
I did try to catch other ones and so forth. And we sent out FOIAs too and so forth. And one school even said they couldn't give us syllabi because it was copyright or whatever excuse they like to try and throw at us. So
False, but
um,
that's okay.
so anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the number of states and the stuff that we've pulled was just general searches and a few FOIAs and things like that. So
Right, right. And it's interesting because you would think a school, a university would be only too happy to hand out a syllabus. Say, this is what we teach. You're not giving anything away. There are only so many, I mean, in theory, there are only so many different ways to teach any subject.
mhm,
So a syllabus doesn't teach the class for you. You could
right.
copy somebody's syllabus verbatim, and you're not really getting much out of that except, oh, they use these resources. And if you're, given the way the teachers unions are so free with whole lesson plans, okay, not
Hmm.
to mention the unions, but there are lots of other learning for justice and other curriculum providers that just pump it out free. These are the resources. These are the questions. So I'm not buying the whole like this is proprietary. I think you would be you would happily hand over your syllabus, at least your source material,
Yeah.
um, if you didn't have something you didn't want people to know about.
Yeah, and we also we reviewed probably at least double the amount that we have in this report,
Mhm.
but there were so many that were very vague or didn't have like they didn't have their materials in there, or it was just basic class information, like where to find your Title IX officer type of stuff. So we did review a lot more of them. These are the ones. So what you're seeing there with the list of terms and stuff, that was kind of like some of our focus, and there's a lot of bad stuff in there that we didn't even pull
Right.
out. So if you want to keep going through that information there.
Right. Well, I want to stop for a moment and I just want to call out a couple of things to people. I think most people watching this know what critical race theory is at this point, oppressor oppressed and that sort of concept. And critical theory is basically the same thing, but applied to other topics other than race. Oppression and power. These are words, I'm sure keywords. But when we look at the people, bell hooks, I want to just show the audience who we're talking about because I think it's relevant. So this is bell hooks. This is there is an institute named after her. She's an acclaimed intellectual, feminist theorist, cultural critic, artist, and writer. She's authored over 36 books, published works that span several genres, including cultural criticism, et cetera, et cetera. She was born with a different name. But books that she's written include Ain't I Woman, Black Women and Feminism, Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, Teaching to Transgress,
Hmm.
Education and the Practice of Freedom, Feminism is for Everybody. So, we're talking about, you're seeing somebody who very clearly is not just left leaning, but hardcore leftist. In fact, when I went to look into other things that she has written and or done or whatever, I went to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and this is something that she didn't invent, this feminist standpoint theory, but she wrote quite a bit within it. So this is something that she subscribed to and agreed with. And if I do a find of bell hooks, you'll come down here, to see that what does it say? The response to modify feminist standpoint theory to take into account the ways in which women's different experiences at the intersectionality of various oppressive social structures will engender different standpoints. Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks, for example, have developed Black feminist standpoint theories. So we have standpoint theory, right? And then feminist standpoint theory. And then we have the Black feminist standpoint theory that take into account the role of women of color in slavery and devalue. Now, what is standpoint theory? If you've ever heard the expression, my truth, your truth, well, feminist standpoint theory makes the three claims. Knowledge is socially situated. Where have we heard that before? Not just in the feminist uh, sort of liturgy. Marginalized groups are socially situated in ways that make it more possible for them to be aware of things and ask questions than it is for the non-marginalized. And research, particularly that focus on power relations, should begin with the marginalized. These are their three core premises. And now imagine these being taught to little children as fact. So remember, it says theory. As a free speech absolutist, I don't really have a problem with people at the university level discussing these topics. But when they go into the schools of education, they teach the future teacher that this is important for students to learn, little children to learn as if it's true. And sadly, this is what's really sad that I've observed. Tell me if you found the same thing. A lot of the teachers, these new teachers, will be taught these ideas and not know that this is not truth. In other words, it's not taught to them as, hey, some people have these ideas and, they're one way of looking at things. They're taught to teach within this point of view, within this mindset.
Yes.
So the student, the little kid doesn't know any different. They can come out of their K-12 education believing that this is a fact and that anyone who would challenge it, let's say a parent or a professor who doesn't subscribe to this way of looking at the world is not just wrong, but mean and terrible and bad and oppressive, right? Because we have oppressor. So did you find that a lot of the new teachers, it's not like they're evil activate, like, ooh, I want to turn the country Marxist. They just don't know any different.
Let's stop there real quick because I want to make that very clear, and I know you're on the same page. Is I want parents who are listening. Your child's teacher is most likely not evil. As Deb just said, probably a lot of these teachers don't even know. I worked with a teacher who, the state I'm in, when I was teaching last, critical race theory. There's a law that bans that or its tenets. And it came up in discussion in professional development, and several teachers we don't even know what that is. We wouldn't know how to spot it. And yet, the stuff we were doing, we were teaching the tenets of critical race theory, so very much so. But what's nefarious is that this stuff's being taught, and parents or listeners, the key word here is best practice. This stuff is being pushed into the teachers' heads as best practice, so they want to pass the class, they want to get their license, they want to go on to get a teaching job. And so part of it is they're just going to do what they're told. And they read this stuff and they're told in their classes. By the way, teaching to transgress was the one that showed up the most in terms of Bell Hooks' work. And so they're being taught that, well, you read this article or this book, and because that's best practice, critical pedagogy, et cetera, et cetera. So, and there's Friday. And so they're told that all these individuals are best practice when they're not. They're actually worst practice, because they're destroying little children. And the teachers in the process, right? Because these teachers are being, we're starting to see teachers today, or they're starting to drop out of the teaching profession. And part of that comes back to a lot of this stuff coming into every facet of teaching, right? We can come back to this later, but you and I, a while back, you were kind of on a journey with me in a way with restorative justice at the school that I was working at. And if you want to think about restorative justice this way, it's discipline based on critical race theory.
Yes.
And so when you start to learn these things, you start to see how they get integrated into everything and so forth and whatnot. So,
exactly. And then
So this.
Palafrère was the other person that came up a lot.
Mhm.
And just for a quick, as you just mentioned, I mean, Palafrère was quite possibly and still is the most influential philosopher, pedagogue, whatever you want to call it, for education in America, in the world, I would say. But definitely in the schools of education in the United States, his reading is required. I mean, I don't know any school that doesn't require some Frere. And they do teach it as best practice. They teach his worldview that education is for the purpose of freeing, liberating. So it's a
Yeah.
liberatory practice. It's not just social justice that students are de facto oppressed. So even the white students, even the sort of non-marginalized, are oppressed by the systems of oppression. They're oppressed by their parents. They're oppressed by capitalism. He's a Marxist.
Mhm.
And so he views the world in an oppressor oppressed narrative, and that there should always be struggle, there should always be revolution. And then when you're done, you start over. There's never done. Like, as soon as you get out of your oppression, you are now an oppressor, and the whole cycle begins again. And uh, teaching through this lens, so to speak, with small children, in my personal opinion, um, creates a lot of distress and anxiety and confusion about the world. Plus, it's just plain old Marxist. I mean, it's economically incorrect if we're going to talk about economic theory. So he's taken sort of a pedagogy and a philosophy of relationships between people, social relationships, but he's so built it around refuting free markets as well, of everything, of ideas, of everything, that you just can't think any other way. If you're taught in Freirean ideology, you can't. Everything else is bad.
Yeah. And we didn't when we wrote the report, we didn't track the number of syllabi that had critical pedagogy in it, but it would probably mirror every time Friday showed up. But one of the things, and I can't remember where I saw this in the core syllabi, but to kind of paint a picture with, even teachers are oppressors to their students under this ideology. And so what happens is that's where parents start to like, why does my teacher keep saying that they're learning from the students too, and that they're a learner just like the students? And it comes from the critical pedagogy. It comes from the fact that these teachers can't be better or more knowledgeable than the students in general. Okay,
That's
we
right.
might say that, like, well, I've been to College of Ed, so I have that information. But if I impart that information onto a child, I'm becoming an oppressor. I'm oppressing them and
Right.
forcing them to have to learn things my way, learn things blah blah blah. And the irony is it's all projection.
Yep.
They say that there's all kinds of different ways of knowing, except for the only way of knowing is through critical pedagogy.
Right. And I mean, his thought was deeply influenced by a number of Hegel's ideas. For
Mm-hmm.
those who aren't familiar with Hegel, I mean, we could have a whole show on that, but it's just, again, you're talking about the idea that, life is a constant struggle and fight. And if you look at his upbringing, it kind of makes sense. If Karl Marx's ideas were foremost influential in his own philosophy, he grew up in colonized Brazil. He did likely experience oppression, the real kind. And as we know, people who grow up in that environment can come away from it thinking that, this is what has to happen. The problem is when you take that and put it into America, and he
Mm-hmm.
got very popular. Why? Because there are actual communists who want to turn America into a communist society, and they want to take us down, as we were. Um, it, the only way to get people to buy into it is do not present it against any competition. So again, the teachers go to teacher college, and it's not like we're going to read some John Locke and we're going to read, so like we're going to read all these other founding documents and so on. We'll read some Bastiat, and then no, we're going to read Frere and bell hooks and people like that. And if you've nothing else, and then also, I'm sure you looked at undergrad and graduate programs, correct?
Yep, all the way
Okay.
through doctorate.
Right. So what a lot of parents don't realize, and help me out if I'm wrong about this, but if a student goes from high school to an education program at the undergrad level and they didn't have fantastic formative education in social studies, history, whatever you can call it, or even literature, or worse, they had critical theory already and that stuff. It's been going on for quite a while. Let's say they had Howard Zinn for history,
Hmm.
which is a very Marxist point of view on U.S. history, and they go from there into one of these teacher colleges. They've had exactly zero exposure to
Yep.
any kind of other philosophy. If, on the other hand, they went to college and majored in something else entirely, there's a possibility, like slim possibility. I was one of those lucky ones. So not only was my high school fairly traditional, I won't call it conservative, but traditional. But when I went to college, I majored in American studies and I was like deep in the Revolutionary War history. Okay. Primary sources, all that stuff.
Hmm.
So you take me and stick me at University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education with this Frarian garbage, and I'm the person in class going, wait, what? You know, and I'm like waving my hand and
Yeah.
getting in arguments with the professor, but I was alone because most of the people there for their masters had gotten their undergrad in education. They, I was
Hmm.
in the tiny minority of people, and a lot of parents don't know this. I think they still think people go to college and major in a subject, maybe, and then get a graduate degree, or when they go to teacher college, they're focusing on a subject matter area. No, they're not. And I'm hoping you can speak a little bit more to not just this garbage that they're learning, but also what teacher colleges teach and don't teach and how little of it is content. That would be really helpful too.
Well, so one of the things we didn't look at that I wanted to, bring up to you on the show here is that we didn't look at the general ed courses, the
Okay.
biology course. That might be something worth looking into at some point to see what is in like biology 101 type of stuff. So remember, the teachers have to take um, a certain amount of credits towards a content area, right? So whether it's U.S. history or biology, chem, etc. I would believe still at this moment, more than not, that the STEM schools are going. They're not going to get a lot of this stuff in the STEM classes themselves, right? So we'll pull that out. If they're in a humanities type courses, they may be slammed. They may have all of this stuff throughout every course all the time, right?
That's what I had. So I
Yeah,
and I don't know about the undergrad, but at the graduate level, the course in, children's literature was all this, like
yeah,
heavily influenced by what books we should choose based on all this stuff. The so-called social studies class was heavily into this stuff. And then even the child development class, where you would like to think the teachers are going to learn about the stages of development of the human child,
yeah.
minor human. We of course learned Piaget, and we did learn these things, but they spent a lot of time on Vygotsky. I would say they spent the majority of their time on Vygotsky. For those who don't know Vygotsky was a communist, but he wasn't even communist enough. Okay,
Right.
for the leaders at the time, and ended up getting put in prison because he still believed that individuals should be individuals even within their communist framework, and that was a no-no. So but even so, they wanted to bastardize Vygotsky's ideas and have us believe that we could. It was sort of like an intro into how to indoctrinate, because one person's scaffolding, zone of proximal development, like there's this little
Mhm.
range where the kid is, but then you can get them to hear with help, with a knowledgeable adult, with a knowledgeable expert leader, somebody, an older kid, somebody helping them get to this level, is now used to justify what most of us, and parents in particular, if you were a fly on the wall, you'd be listening going, hold the phone, you're telling them what to think. This
Yeah.
isn't scaffolding. You've gone way past scaffolding, and you're literally giving them narratives to regurgitate. But they'll say, "No, no. No, this is important. We're scaffolding. This is Vygotsky. This is zone of proximal development." So they focus more on that than anything to do with Piaget or Kohlberg or anybody else. These are different theorists in child development. And so I've found a lot of teachers, young teachers today, if you talk to them about what minor children can and can't do, like in terms of brain science, where they are in terms of their moral development and their priorities, they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They're so steeped in helping that kid get to their enlightened, liberated state that they've not really focused on, you're being abusive right now. This is not okay.
Well, and the irony too here is with Vygotsky is let's say that these teachers are in good faith operating with the zone of proximal development under the equity that these schools are all operating, K-12 all the way up through university. When you do have a mixed classroom of performers, you have high achievers and you have those that struggle. Under the guise of equity, you have to actually bring the high achievers down from the top of the
Yes.
zone of proximal development. You have to force them at least at best into the bottom bracket of the ZPD, and so that is kind of like the irony, the sad irony of it all. Let's also make this distinction with the undergrad program. Remember, a lot of these students have to take hundred plus credits.
Yep.
Right. I don't even know what it's up to anymore, because they just keep adding them. So they take all these 100 and some credits, potentially, depending on their content area, could be fully laced all the way through with critical theories, etc. At the graduate level, especially master's program, it's about 36 credits. So you're talking, what is that, like 12 courses or so, if I do my math right. And so yeah, you're gonna have a more intense focus of courses. So let's draw upon the Portland State thing real quick, because that'll play into your graphic here with whiteness. Portland State, the one thing that was our kind of our marquee part of the report, because I was able to randomly find this. I don't even know. I couldn't tell you how I found it, but I came across the entire elementary ed programming. So that's what parents will see there is a good piece of that, and. You know, it's a program for both masters and undergrad. So it's kind of a mirror program, except for the masters have to do whatever their thesis might be, which I can get into later about these papers and these theses that these people have to write. And so what parents are going to find now, you kind of alluded to or talked about, like, what are they learning now, like with the ed psych part of it, right? Well, they're starting to replace ed psych and classroom management courses, like with, if you at some point go back to the Portland State stuff, with transformative SEL or transformative social emotional. Now, we're not even talking social emotional learning. We're talking the transformative one, which is lovely, just lovely. And that's the anti-racist form. So to come to the whiteness, parents or listeners who go onto our website and go into the report, and actually we featured it on the
what
main.
You're talking about with the Portland State, just so that we're clear.
Yes,
okay.
Portland State.
So folks, what he's talking about is if you go to the report at
on the main page,
right, and then you scroll down, what you're going to find, and you'll have all these different things. Here's the case study, Portland State. And, how they share their vision with educators and counselors, create a just and equitable world. Degree programming is centered around the idea of the teacher as activist. Program includes Touchstone for anti-bias, anti-racist educators, which states that the school's elementary education program is guided by recognizing the histories of colonization, settler colonialism, white supremacy, imperialism, and neoliberalism upon which the United States and its system of education have been built and sustained. This is quite illuminating. That they would admit, that they would say that the United States system of education has been built, like that's their belief, that it's built on this stuff. And they're openly stating that, like, the whole system rotten from the beginning, which is ironic because I say that too, but not for these reasons.
Right.
But it's like they're admitting that this wonderful, amazing institution that they say we should all cleave to and hold on to forever has been this rotten, horrible, terrible thing for all this time. Yeah. And it's like, but we should keep it and fix it. Like,
and let's be clear here with the audience that I know someone's like, oh, well, it's Portland State. Of course they're doing this. No, they're doing this everywhere. And that was kind of the point of the report, was to show that this stuff, Minnesota, this stuff is everywhere right now. Oh my gosh, that's weird. Why in Minnesota? Well, maybe you should start looking at the lovely governor / vice presidential candidate in what he's done
Slash
in that
Chinese
state.
spy. I think he's
Yeah,
a spy.
yeah. So I mean, it's in Minnesota, like my family's from Minnesota, and or part of my family, and so they've always been on the progressive side of education. But there was a point where it was kind of like you and I probably like, okay, yeah, that was what you and I might think of as maybe an appropriate form of inclusion, right? There's students who have been excluded from the classroom who should have been in the classroom,
Yeah.
right? Maybe a high functioning child with autism, right? Type of stuff, right? Okay, so. But coming back to this is not just stuck in Portland State, right? In Portland. This stuff, this anti-racist stuff, I mean, parents should know now, this is everywhere across the country.
Sure.
And they're training 20-year-olds to do this stuff and to incorporate it into their teaching pedagogy, their teaching profession, and how they operate. And so I know we'll come to this, but how this trickles down into their
Well,
kindergarten or
even just
classroom.
you show in the graphic right here. I mean, if you're gonna have 40 average certified elementary education teachers produced every year, this is what that translates to in terms of students who are
Yeah.
affected being in classrooms with these people. And somebody in the audience might say, well, just because they went to that school that taught that stuff and they graduated doesn't mean they're going to bring it into the classroom. Let me just tell you, the odds are about 98% that it does mean exactly that, for the
Mm-hmm.
reason that I alluded to earlier, which is they have no other framework. What else would they use?
Right.
Again, unless they were like me or like Rhyen, the rare, needle in a haystack person. What else have they got?
And
This
if
is
they're
what
not,
they've been marinating in for 4 years.
right. And if they're not, why are they even going to college for this stuff then? Like
That's right.
if you're,
Why did they
if,
drop out somewhere along the way and go, whoa?
yeah, or they better be demanding their money back,
Well,
right? Like
remember
if,
too, the people hiring them, you have to remember we've been at this now for what, 30 more 40 years of this type of stuff.
yeah.
So we have to remember that the people who are now in a position to hire them, principals, superintendents, master teachers who head up departments, who interview them and decide if they're going to
Mm-hmm.
come in, or simply head up their department and tell them what they're going to do. These are the resources you're going to use. This is what we do in the school. This is how you're going to teach. And if you don't like it, there's the door. I mean, that's what happened to me.
Yes.
So there I was, little Miss Needle and Haystack, going into the school, and I didn't want to do these things. At the time, it was whole word reading garbage, and I was, getting pretty much blackballed in my area. I had to drive, let's see, an hour in every direction around this Chicagoland area. I was in Chicago at the time, and I still couldn't get a job after my first teaching job decided you're not a team player. Like, meaning I wasn't going to do the stuff that they
Yeah.
wanted me to do. And I had no autonomy. It wasn't like I could just close my door in an elementary school and do what I wanted. I was brand spanking new. You have supervisors, you have people who are watching over
Mm-hmm.
you constantly. So this trickles down. And to your point, now we've got it. Here's a class
Yes.
identity. And so I never had this class. Thank you. Whoever got to
Right.
have this
Right.
class. This is crazy. I mean, this is, how to socially engineer the children. That's not
Mm-hmm.
teaching.
No.
That's not teaching.
And let's kind of zoom out for just a second to kind of like connect dots for people. One of the terms that this kind of falls under is culturally competent, right? Which sounds really nice, right? Well, you're culturally competent. What it actually means, if they say that they're culturally competent, means that they're steeped in the theories. They're steeped in critical theory, critical pedagogy, et cetera, et cetera. What you're going to see here that we're going to show you. And about a week or so ago, it was revealed that Minnesota's teacher licensing program has now mandated that teachers are culturally proficient or culturally competent. The other thing is, Deb, is that we put together a report in the spring that parents can find at defendinged.org on DEI hiring. And so I'll give you one specific example of how this plays out at the school level is University Place in Washington. On their website, so they're not even hiding it, on their website, they claim that in the hiring process, they put at the front of the line teachers who are Black or minority, right? So they say that right there. And then after that, it says, and then we prioritize teachers who are culturally competent. So that was, by the way, that was the gist of that whole report too, of districts across the country and how they're hiring. And so if you're a teacher and you're not incorporating this stuff into your teaching practices, you're not going to get hired. So they're already weeding out these teachers who are not steeped in this stuff.
Right. And I mean, think of what it's like to get branded not culturally competent. And the justification for public schools in the way back was that this is how we were going to reproduce our culture for the next generation. I mean, obviously, if you now go back and read Dewey and Horace Mann and people like that, the culture they defined as our culture wasn't really our culture. It was the one they wanted us to have, which of course has evolved into this mess. But that's what they're talking about. To your point, they're talking about the culture they wish we had, not the one we actually have. And in order to do that, in order to denigrate the one, I shouldn't say had, they have to denigrate it by making up garbage like white supremacy culture and having these things like perfectionism and making claims for which there is no evidence whatsoever in terms of scientific evidence. These are beliefs. This is somebody's opinion. You get people together and say, well, this is what I think that white supremacy culture is. There is no such thing. You can't measure this. Imagine in reverse if this said Black culture. And you had a document, somebody sat down and said, well, Black culture is like this. And they typed up a bunch of very academic looking documents. You would very quickly recognize it as something absolutely foul and based on opinion and not fact and racist. Straight up
right out of Jim Crow.
Right out of Jim Crow. You would see that immediately. But when it says white supremacy culture, it doesn't look that way. And then getting back to where I was over here with this whiteness thing. This was the Smithsonian's own site from the Museum of the African American History. Now they've since removed the whiteness thing, like actual infographic from here, but back in 2020, May of 2021, I believe it was here. And they do still have on there, though, white privilege. They still have Robin DiAngelo giving her little speech, even though we now know she plagiarized most of her book. She's still there. White dominant culture, white supremacy. So this is our tax dollars pay for the Smithsonian, and this is how they describe it. But Newsweek did an article about it, which is still available. There it is, May of 2021. And it says the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture recently unveiled guidelines, again, they've since been taken down, for talking about race. Like they were going to tell us how to talk about race. So if the Smithsonian puts together this thing, which many of you may have seen because it was making the rounds, how to talk about race. Imagine what teacher colleges are teaching students about how to talk about race with children. So all of this, we look at it and go, that's ridiculous. And we don't like it, or maybe some people accept it, but we're adults and we can choose to have this conversation or choose to reject this conversation. Except in the workplace where they started doing it. But imagine you're a kid and you don't have first of all, you have no freedom to get up and walk out. You don't know any different. You come from a home where your parents are telling you something quite different from this. Oh, be colorblind, or, like we don't see race, we see people, individual, whatever. And now your teacher's teaching you that this is how we talk about race. And now you're not just at odds with what you might feel inside or what you think, but you're at odds with your own parents, or you're at odds with your own family, or you're at odds with people trying to teach you a different way to talk about race.
I think that's the point for some of these people. I think that's absolutely the point. They want to go after the kids, and I'm not talking to teachers. All right, let's pull that back. The teachers are being trained in this stuff because it's best practice. But I think in the to zoom way out, there are individuals that really want to disrupt the family unit. Does that sound like BLM or not? Right. They want to disrupt the nuclear family, and let's with Portland State in particular. Remember, this is an elementary education program.
Right.
They're teaching these teachers about the wheel of privilege. If you take a look, by the way, and you don't have to necessarily spend a lot of time here, people can go and see this, and I encourage them to do that. In this class itself, there's an activity about, I think if you scroll for me here a little bit, I can't remember where it's at, but it's an activity they do in the class where the people evaluate their oppressor status, and the different privileges and oppressors, so forth. I think it's one of those. Anyway, let's connect these dots to, it's probably up towards the top of this
Okay,
section.
sorry about that.
Yeah, they're right there. Right, go back
This
down.
one?
Sorry. No, down a little further. Right there. That activity.
Okay.
It's vile. It's absolutely vile. If you
The social
look at,
identity mapping.
correct. So let's connect the dot to how this manifests. This is a high school level, but let's this assignment, not by name, but almost the same exact assignment, is in an Alameda Unified Ethnic Studies course for freshmen. They do almost the exact same activity, where what they do, if
So
people
they're
can't,
13.
yes, they're still 13, 14. And what they do with this activity is they get you to sit down, and they lead you to what oppressors. They don't kind of leave it as a blank slate open door. It's really like white Christian males, or if you live in the United States, you're an oppressor, right? And so why would they do that? What's the point? The point is for them to be far left social justice activists, which comes back to the theme, if you will, of the entire report, which is these teachers are not there to really teach reading. We know this because these kids across the country are getting worse at being able to read. What is Chicago Public Schools has a 20% proficiency rate, and they had over 30 schools that have nobody proficient, right, in reading. Yet they just are interjecting now ethnic studies into everything.
Well, even
Right?
in here, they talk about these terms, gender queer, gender nonconforming, gender fluid. They use terms with minor children that are theory based.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saying for God, it's going on a year now, that we really need to start calling this what it is, which is a cult. It is a religion. I mean, not a religion like the typical religion, but a
Yeah.
cult religion, because everything they're pushing is belief. It is not based on any kind of fact. This is what the world they would like to see, like unburdened by what has been. They
Yep.
imagine what can be, as Vice President Harris keeps talking about, that what can be is a world in which men and women are, whatever, there's no such thing as a biological difference and so on. But they're teaching it to kids like this is truth.
Yes.
And so, as you pointed out, that's not what most parents don't send their children to school to pursue truth, period. And I would argue that maybe they ought to, but truth by my definition with a capital T. But most parents,
Mm-hmm.
if you ask them, think they're sending their kids to school to get skills, to get certain kinds of skills to, read, write, do math, and so on. Secondarily, they think they're supposed to use those skills to learn facts, like knowledge about the world. And the idea there is that when they have enough of this thing called knowledge, that then they'll be able to identify maybe what kind of career they want, what kind of college they want to go to, and so on. So I think if you took 9 parents or 10 parents and, lined them up and said, why do you send your kids to school? Well, to learn stuff, right? And how to do stuff. And that is so far removed from what schools are teaching right now. And I don't think parents realize it, because they still will say, oh, we're doing reading. What they don't tell you is, yeah, they're letting the kids listen to audiobooks. Someone's reading to them,
Mm-hmm.
or, they're learning the most rudimentary reading and the teacher's reading the rest. But that's just a class where they're going to, read about whatever that teacher wants them to read about. They're not learning how to read
Yeah.
for understanding, for comprehension, for vocabulary, like most people think. So they're using the same words, completely different dictionary, and most parents don't even realize it. No idea.
Yep. And then when you go to those parents that do understand what they're looking at. They go to parent teacher conferences or they go to the school board meeting and they call them out on it. What happens is well, you just don't understand because you don't have the credentials, you don't know what best practice is, et cetera, or you don't have the experience in the classroom. It's like, well, I've just raised the damn kids. Excuse my language. It's like I've just spent the last 15 years raising this child, and you spend 45 minutes a day and you're telling me how I don't
Right.
know how to raise this child. And
Right.
so that's
Or
where
they'll go
parents
back
need.
to this and say that the parent is racist,
Mhm.
or the parent is, an elitist, or the parent is an ableist, or the parent is a homophobe, or the parent is a transphobe. So in other
Yes.
words, anything you want to pick on that's in the curriculum, they'll find the thing they claim you're oppressive about or abusive about because you're complaining. So if you say my kid isn't learning to read, they're going to say, well, why are you emphasizing, the written word? That's white supremacy. If a black person says it is, well, you're white, you're now internalizing the white oppressor narrative,
Yeah.
and you're a race traitor. If you want objective, rational, linear thinking in science class, as opposed to a bunch of doom and gloom about climate change or gender woo or whatever, well, that's obviously white supremacy too. So they've come up with a convenient little package of narratives to fend off any criticisms that parents would have of the teacher's inability to teach what we expect them to teach.
Right. Right. And the ethnic studies crowd in the gurus, if you will, behind the ethnic studies movement. By the way, for those that don't know, the liberated ethnic studies is almost completely based off of critical pedagogy. They love Freire. I mean, if you could take his view of education and package it, it would be ethnic studies. And even they say in one of their seminal textbooks that the English language itself is oppressive, but they use it so that they can reach more people, type of thing. And so when you take this, let's say ethnic studies, just for an example, because it's the same stuff that you see with what's in this report, and they're pushing ethnic studies down into pre-K, and they're teaching kids. We have lesson plans on our website along this that we've seen used in schools, where they teach preschool to second graders to question even what is normal. That's queer theory.
That's right.
They question what is normal. What is normal? What's really normal? And they do a generative process with these kids, and they push them from pre-K. Now imagine that they go from pre-K all the way up through high school. They go into the colleges, and not just the College of Ed. It could be any program, but they're still getting all this stuff. What do they look like when they come out? Right? I mean, we get to use a little bit of our imagination, but not much anymore. Really what you're going to see is all of these kids protesting right now on college campuses from day zero of the school year. They're already back at protesting and doing campouts and all this other stuff. That's the goal of this stuff. Because if you're teaching the teachers to be social justice activists, it's natural that they're going to train the students to become social justice activists, and that is bearing out in the curriculums. In California, what we're starting to see is that ethnic studies is being integrated into language arts. It's being integrated into mathematics. They call it embedded ethnic studies. And with ethnic studies, a requirement is the praxis piece, is the activism piece. So usually it's like a unit 4 or unit 5 in the curriculum. And it's what is it? It's a participatory action research. They call it action research, but it's activism, street activism. And these kids are required to go out and either be part of an activist organization or create one. And they're embedding it in every single course with this stuff. So what you end up having, and I'm waiting for this, by the way, is for the high school students to start doing more walkouts and protests like they did after October 7th.
Yeah.
And you saw that up in the Bay Area in California, where and when you peel back the layers, I'm kind of deviating a little bit here, but I'm trying to paint where this goes. when you peel back the layers, out in California, it was AROC, the Arab Resource Organizing Center, who was actually has a club, a youth club inside the schools, and they were coordinating all these walkouts. So you have these Tides Foundation funded organization inside of schools, co-opting these children who have been primed for this through this program. And that's what this looks like in the long term, is that you have these teachers who are trained up in being activists, and let's go back to the social emotional learning course here. They're using, I guess, lack of a better word, a bit of brainwashing technique, right? They're getting these kids, their emotions wound up. They're teaching them, well, Dad, I came home and I was told I was an oppressor because I'm just a white male. So because of your immutable characteristics, you're somehow an oppressor, even though your parents make, maybe you're living at poverty line. You know what I mean? So,
well, and they do it by taking the student in the college student or the university student. It says right here that teachers play a significant role in establishing classroom and school environments that promote culturally elevating social emotional learning among students. So the base culture is bad. We have to elevate it. Therefore, the main goal of the course is for teacher candidates to grow in knowledge about SEL and personal identity work. They struggle, the teachers. They
yes.
make the student teachers within these classes are effectively being psychologically abused. It is a struggle session in and of itself. The only way you're getting through this class and getting a decent grade in this class is if you are divulging all kinds of personal stuff, if you're working on your own identity, if you
Yes.
on that wheel or in the center circle at all, you've got to like be confessing all of your guilt and all this other stuff, so that by the time you come out of a program like this, you have become the person that you then want to go turn the students into. And worse than that, you've become a person who desperately needs the students to agree with you, because
Yes.
what these
Yes.
programs do is they break down the psyche of the teacher, of the student teacher, to the point where they are not comfortable with difference of opinion. They're not comfortable with parents who have, different views, unless those views are marginalized, like they come from marginalized cultures, because then the fact that they have different views, like they cover their hair and they come from a background where the woman is subservient and all that, well, that's okay because they're marginalized people. But put that person in a wig and she's Jewish, that's not okay. Put that person with a cross around her neck and she's deferring to her husband, and that's not okay, because those people are not marginalized in their worldview. So they have so many hierarchies now in their brains that they're intensely uncomfortable with anybody who disagrees with them or challenges them, which is why parents, when you do try to have these conversations with teachers, you might find them getting very defensive, very, getting their feelings hurt, going up the food chain to their supervisor to fight back against you. In other words, you might not get a response. You might get a response from their boss saying, you're picking on my teacher. And so I've seen this happen so much. Parents will say, they say I'm being antagonistic and mean to the teacher, and all I did was ask some questions about what's going on in the class, and the teacher's off crying. They're reducing them to a pools of, puddles of goo in terms of their own ability to stand on their own 2 feet with their own opinions, because they're not their opinions.
Right. And let's also state that what you described in terms of getting the teachers to evaluate their racism, anti-racism, identity, etc.
Yeah.
If you go through this report, you're going to see syllabi after syllabi after syllabi over and over again. Those assignments, I didn't really highlight that part of it except for within Portland State with the assignments part, but you're going to find a lot of syllabi that have assignments that the one of the main set of assignments for this semester is these students to write these self-reflective teacher philosophy or what have you that has them engaged in seeking out what their identity is, how they're anti-racist or social justice people. And it's exactly the process you just described. And by the way, they're doing this again, they're doing this stuff in K-12. They're
Yes.
having these students, I'm going to jump here a little bit to paint a picture here, but we found recently in Chicago public schools, we found that their newest health curriculum for pre-K through high school, we found lesson plans for at least through sixth grade. And the one thing that really dawned on me, like, by the way, fifth grade, they part of the curriculum is teaching kids about puberty blockers and teaching the kids about people with penises and people with ovaries, that type of stuff. But what really was alarming to me, but eye-opening, was that when you zoom out, you can see the whole queer theory generative process play out. In pre-K, they do this, and they kind of inch and nudge the kids, so that by the time you get to fifth grade and sixth grade, you're openly talking about transgenderism, and some transgender students use puberty blockers. Wait, hold up, what?
Right. So
Right?
the generative part, folks, if you're not familiar with what Ryan's talking about, is where they throw out a concept or they throw something out or they put something in front of the kids, like visuals, whatever, that the kid couldn't possibly know what it is. So they're going to ask. They're going to, what's
Mm-hmm.
that? And then that is the invitation for the teacher to bring it up. And then when you, the parent, go, wait, were you talking to my child about? Well, they asked.
Yep.
It's their experience, it's in their world, and I'm just explaining what they want to know about. And so that, again, you're the bad guy for denying and oppressing your child. Your child is hungry for knowledge about the world, and all I'm doing is answering their questions. But of course, they generated the questions by putting these ideas, like Ryan said, like, and some people use clear period, like, what's that?
Yeah. And so we see this stuff, lack of a better word, trickle down into K-12, because again, coming back to your point about, you go to your child's teacher and you ask them sometimes just very simple questions, and they're already on guard because
Oh, yeah.
they've been trained in their brain on the intersectionality wheel of privilege, and they would view me, okay, I go into my child's school
Oh
to
my God,
talk
you're awful. We got white, we got stable, able-bodied
yeah,
Christian, adult, I assume neurotypical, probably a homeowner,
yep.
post-secondary education, monogamous marriage, citizen,
Yeah,
salary.
I'm racking
Oh
up the
my God,
points.
you're the worst.
I'm racking up the points here. And so when I go into that meeting, they're already that, especially those that have been dealing with this long enough,
Yeah.
that's in their head. And I'm not going to, like, for you growing up, but I know for me growing up in the 80s and early 90s, we were very much hammered with judge a person on the content of character, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I went to Catholic schools, so maybe in some places that wasn't the case, but I want to believe that was mostly universal, right? That we're not going to stereotype people. Don't stereotype people. That's all this is doing, is before I interact with you, I'm stereotyping you. And that's part of the thing with the pronouns too, right? Is like, well, if you don't use pronouns, I'm already going to stereotype you then, and so forth. And so they're training teachers to judge kids based on all kinds of things that are completely out of a 4-year-old's control.
That's right.
And it's so evil. It's just so evil. And I'm not saying teachers themselves are evil, but they're being told lies. They're being told this is best practice to treat people this way. And so what's the end game? Like, why would you do this? So that you can be, you can be unburdened by what has been so that you can see what can be, right?
Right.
That's what this is. We're going to unburden ourselves from white supremacy. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, this is how we unburden ourselves from white supremacy. We treat people, we treat children, we train teachers to treat children like little avatars of some one person in history,
That's
so
right.
to speak, right?
And like the worst one.
Yes,
But
because
interestingly, we never point out the worst people from any of these other categories.
well, I thought about this recently, Deb. I'm like, these people paint like all of white people in history as rich white men with monocles and a top hat running around, right? Like Mr. Peanut. Like every white guy's Mr. Peanut, And it's like, no, no, how about those white guys that were crawling miles in the road to Wigan Pier, right? They're crawling miles in coal mines, dying at 50 of black lung disease. Were those guys privileged?
Right.
you know I mean,
Right.
the majority of human history, regardless of race, regardless of country, it was just miserable.
That's
And
right.
yes, there was a select people that were better off than others,
That's
absolutely.
true. That's true. Thank you, Trader Bear, so much for the super chat. He says, I'm blasting out your conversation on all channels. Every parent in America needs to hear you both. Thank you so much. I really
Thanks.
do hope that a lot of people hear this, Ryan, and I hope they read the report. I did want to make one point, and because everything you're saying is so important about the kids that will be affected and either grow up to be activists, or don't have to grow all the way up to be activists, they'll be high school activists. But I also want to give a shout out on behalf of the kids who don't. And what I mean by that is that, it's there will still be parents out there who will say, well, my kid isn't, falling for any of this, or, we raise our kids differently and they go to these schools, but they're ignoring it, whatever. Let me suggest to you that as much as they are not buying into it or becoming activists, they're hurting. And they're hurting for two
Mhm.
reasons. One is they know they're described as on the outs. So they have a couple of choices here. They can just isolate themselves with their own like-minded peers and kind of turn away from all of that and try to self preserve or whatever, which isn't really great. That's not a healthy way to look at life. Is like walling yourself off with your own little group. But what are they missing out on? So think of all the knowledge they're not getting. Think of all the scholarship they are not doing. So even if they come home and they're an avid reader, or even if you're talking around the dinner table about history or whatever, they're spending their days, hours of their days, being proselytized to, being, having people,
Mhm.
browbeat them and struggle them. And they're at risk, physical risk and danger, because if they don't buy into this, after a point, there's only so much you can hide. When they demand participation and you must share and put your post-it note of your emotions and do these things, they either have to learn to lie. So they're sitting there being absolutely phony and fake and saying a bunch of garbage just to get a grade, which teaches them not a great message, that what I
Right.
have to do to get by in this world is be completely false. And then I'm sorry, but over time you stop knowing who you really are when you're lying all day long. But you mistrust adults, in particular your parents. Why are you sending me to this place every day where they talk nonsense, and I've got to be prisoner in this place for 7 hours, 8 hours, listening to a teacher who hates me clearly, or whatever, if you're a white male, for sure. And they're hurting too. So I think we focus a lot on the kids who become activists, or even the parents are all into it and all this kind of stuff, and we forget about the kids who are just sort of quietly struggling along. And all of the focus on mental illness in the school is around the kids who are sort of demonstrably borderline personality disordered, and they're very, they
Mhm.
demonstrate their issues left, right, and center. But the quiet ones who are just going along to get along, whatever, that's not healthy either. And you can develop some really unhealthy coping strategies. Cynicism, deep, deep cynicism when you're just a teenager is
Right.
is is theft. These kids should have hope. They should be looking forward to their adulthood. They should be thinking about their dreams and their goals and all these things that they wanted to do. We had that. You had that. Even though I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, I was like, I'm going to be an adult and, grow up and have kids. And they're looking like the world's going to end and all these people are psycho and I'm stuck in a building with them all day and my teacher's a weirdo. And I mean, do you
Right.
so, every kid is being affected. It's not just the ones who are getting their minds washed from this crap.
Well, in this particular case with the colleges of ed, these teachers end up going and teaching those children, and so let's say it's a child that goes the vocational route and goes off to, welding school, and fantastic, male or female, don't really care. They go off to welding school, they have kids, right? Well, their kids are going to be taught by these people, and so forth as well. And this stuff gets out into the community. All of a sudden, you can't go to a Target without this stuff being in your face, because these people are social justice activists, and they've pushed it
But
into
don't
the.
try to criticize it because you'll get dragged. I tried to do that last year. I just made a quick little comment about Target and the
Yeah.
Black Joy campaign. And I had death threats. I had to file a police report
Oh
because I
Lord.
criticized a marketing campaign at Target. That tells you how far this thing has gone.
Yeah, yeah. These, and you can't even. It's so sad. Like, even at family gatherings, and I think probably at this point,
Yeah.
sadly, I think a lot of families have been affected by this, in terms of, you kind of regret going to the certain parties because so and so from your family is going to be there, right? And
Yep.
it's so sad, because I can remember not long ago that I had family members who I disagreed with on things, but we could still go and have a great time and sit at the table and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And so this stuff is everywhere. And I know Florida. Let's use Florida as a positive example. What Florida has done is they've created some state laws, and they're working
Yeah.
this stuff out of their colleges of education. And so they've enacted some stuff that way to get this out of there. And to answer one of your earlier questions about these programs, is these teachers are, it's not training teachers so much in how to be a better teacher. How, they're training these teachers in exactly what to think,
Yep.
right? And they're modeling for them, like with this Portland State stuff, they're modeling for them what lessons to do with the students,
Right.
and so forth. And with the social emotional learning stuff, what's really nefarious about that is that they're practicing mental health medicine on children, and they took one course on it. Like,
Yeah.
you're not even close to qualified to act in that. And parents, what this looks like too, by the way, this Deb made the comment about it's dangerous. Very much so. And Deb knows this because she and I were in communication during this time. But restorative justice, again, is critical race theory with discipline with critical race theory embedded in it, and probably some queer theory, et cetera, blah, blah. But I worked at a school that was trying to do restorative justice with fidelity, and people got hurt. Students got hurt because it's kind of no fault to the teachers. I mean, we kind of hit on this, so I'll leave this alone. But teachers were so afraid to give kids detentions. Administration was so afraid of the government and OCR, Office of Civil Rights, coming in and filing complaints because too many, black males were getting detentions, et cetera, or suspensions, et cetera. So they go to this restorative justice. They stop suspending kids that really needed to not be in the school because they were violent.
Yep.
And they kept these kids there. And I had numerous of them in this building I was at. And it got to the point where it took several times to finally suspend a kid for threatening to stab a girl in the eye, stabbing a teacher with a blunt object, throwing a kid through a plate glass window, and then finally he this is stuff they're teaching teachers, by the way, microaggressions. For a month he could not let a girl's microaggression go. He couldn't let it go, and he finally got to the point where they were actually afraid he might kill a girl because he was telling her he was going to kill her. And so, that's how this stuff ends up manifesting very dangerously for these students. And I know your audience has probably seen a ton of video in the last year or so of school fights and this and
Yep.
that showing up on social media.
Well, when you teach students that words are violence, and you teach them that someone's existence is oppressive to you, so that whole inner circle, these people are oppressors. Well, think about that. That's a verb. To oppress is theoretically an action. But if you're just going to say that someone who's white or someone who's male or someone who is hetero or whatever is oppressive and oppressing marginalized people, then a student, if you especially start in kindergarten, the student picks up on that and they now have license and they actually believe, because I've never heard any different, they
Mm-hmm.
actually believe that their fellow students in a diverse school, remember, we want all the schools
Mm-hmm.
to be so diverse and be a microcosm of the society. So now they can look right across the classroom and say, that person, by their very existence and things I didn't choose, just who they are, is oppressing me. Now imagine that kid is proud of who they are. They're proudly Christian, or they're proudly American, or they're proudly whatever they are. Okay. Even, yes, if they're proudly white. I mean, I know it's not fashionable, or, we're not supposed to say that, but if they're just not ashamed, let's put it that
Mm-hmm.
way. It's not about being proud. It's just like, I'm not ashamed of the thing I didn't choose, which is my melanin content. That it is considered violence, because oppression equals
Yeah.
action. So that's why a kid, he may be predisposed to violence because of a whole host of other problems that he's got. But do you want to play Russian roulette with your child's safety? That a kid who's already sort of genetically or psychologically predisposed to being very aggressive, maybe they're in a home where that's not, frowned upon, or they see it modeled. Now they go into an environment where the messaging is explicit that they have a right to
Yep.
feel this way about other people simply for breathing in and out in their presence, never mind looking at them funny or whatever. And how long is it before somebody does get killed? It's just a matter of time. They are setting up a situation is quite incendiary. I pulled this up, by the way, I'm in North Carolina, so I wanted to pull up what my state is supporting, because this is my tax dollars at University of North Carolina. And what do you see here? Social justice and education. So what this shows you, parents, is what the report has done is each of these schools links to, so here's the Portland State one that Ryan's been talking about. So you go over here, and this is where you're going to find the full deep dive into Portland State. You're going to get that
Mm-hmm.
whole program of study that shows, look at these classes:
Yeah.
identity and social, emotional, and cultural law and politics. Did you think they were going to school to learn how to teach math and science? But what is this? Even if this is a master's program, you know what I'm missing, Ryan? Where's instructional design?
Yeah.
Where's classroom management? Where are professional standards?
Well,
Where's
because I mean,
hello?
classroom management's been replaced with SCL and restorative justice courses, because they are teaching the teachers now restorative justice. That's like a
Well, and there's
so.
no instructional design. And that should really be a red warning flag to people, because you really have to ask yourself, not just what are the teachers teaching in terms of subject matter, because
Mhm.
all this isn't necessarily the subject matter literally the teachers are going to teach. This is the worldview. This is the teacher is the student here in a way of looking at all the material that they'll have to teach. But without instructional design and without subject matter expertise, they'll now go, as one of the commenters here has so helpfully pointed out, that they will go and take curriculum offered to them by, where did she put it in here? I think uh teaching for truth. Teaching for truth is now learning for justice. Yeah,
Mhm.
because I think Leave Them Kids Alone was talking about that. But they'll go online. They'll go either to the Teachers Union website or Learning for Justice or many of these other curriculum developers, and
Yep.
they'll download lessons. And then the lessons are already written like this. But if they're not, if it's just teachers pay teachers, or it's, some curriculum that the school district bought, they come at it with this, and they don't know how. They quite literally don't know how to teach lessons in such a way that the student will be encouraged to ask questions, challenge the teacher, look for other resources, read anything proficiently. So all they are after a point is presenters and indoctrinators. They're there to socially engineer the kids and present material in a superficial way. And the kid just answers a bunch of questions and perform certain activities, like their participation, and they get their grade. So when you get your kid's A at the end of the semester, that is highly likely to reflect an A for attitude, an A for their aptitude at these messages and these narratives. Even if they wrote an essay, it's going to reflect this garbage,
Mhm.
and not any kind of knowledge or ability to get knowledge for themselves. It's straight regurgitation.
And let's remember that some states are jettisoning, they're getting rid of teacher praxis exams. For those that
Yes.
don't know, there is a basic skills test that teachers have to pass, which is I'm going to tell you, it's basically, let's say freshman year course material. You know, like you go and you solve geometric equations, but they give you the equations, so you just have to figure out how to plug in the info. Teachers are failing this, so they're getting rid of these tests. So imagine if you're, you know, in some areas, if your child's teacher is going through this program, but they don't even have the basic content level knowledge to pass a very rudimentary, probably below SAT, ACT level test.
Yeah.
And so forth. Or let's say it's at least as like a
literacy tests. The
yeah.
teacher.
Right. And these people, I mean, I remember standing in line for that test back in Illinois way back in the day, and a guy was bragging in line about how he failed it 6 times. Like, bro, like this, and trust me, this test was not hard. And so, and listen, God bless people for trying, but like, holy cow, man, like go, you maybe this is not for you.
Right.
So that's what's going on with this stuff too, is we're constantly lowering standards for whatever reason. Well, there are reasons, aren't there? There are very not good reasons for lowering the standards because they want to be inclusive. I guess, to correct myself.
At this point, I think the standards have to be lowered and they've been lowered for decades. So as low as they are, it's not reflecting, like they're not as low as they really ought to be. Meaning, like if we were to look at what these kids are actually capable of, we think it's bad. It's actually worse than it is, because they've been lowering them steadily for so long that you're not seeing the real lack of understanding or knowledge.
Yep. And then you start to see these districts getting rid of honors programs, and they're getting rid of high level academic courses, because it's just not, quote, fair.
Or they replace it with AP. And a lot of parents, because again, with the equity thing, was, all kids should have access to AP. Well, that wasn't the point of AP, advanced placement. It's called advanced placement for a reason. The idea was that the student could take a college level class in high school, get college credit and high school credit simultaneously. And if they pass a test, to demonstrate proficiency in the subject at the college level. This was put out by the College Board. I took AP classes in college, or in high school rather, and I earned the credit so I could start with sophomore courses in American Lit and American History, or English in general, actually, and American History. And this was great because I was majoring in American Studies. So I could have graduated as a junior if I wanted to, but it opened up opportunities for me to study abroad and do things where I didn't have to take all my classes in my major for 4 solid years. But, today I'm tutoring students. I'll have students come to me through a tutoring service who are in AP classes and telling me the teacher's not teaching the class. In other words, AP is like a receptacle for them to go, look how many kids we have from marginalized groups in an AP class. The teacher's then not teaching the class. Nobody's looking at their pass rate. Nobody seems to care how many kids are actually passing the test, which was the whole point of it. They've already dumbed down the test and they still aren't passing a lot of people. And then the kids are having to go find outside tutors and outside people to help them just teach the class. They're having subs do it. And why are they doing that? Well, it's real simple. In order to properly teach an AP class, even as dumbed down as they are, you need to be a subject matter expert. You can't just wing that. You can't be the football coach. Maybe sometimes I teach a social studies class and teach AP US history. So they don't have enough people to accommodate all the new sections of AP that they've opened up to have a minimum percentage of marginalized people. Back in my day, you had to have a recommendation from the teachers from your prior year. You couldn't just sign up for AP. Today, you can just sign up and take it. Nobody approves it or disapproves. You decided to take it, you take it. And how are you going to teach a class where some of the kids in that class could barely read, but they signed up for AP? You can't kick them out, or then you have this whole like it's racist thing. So we're starting to see this, and I'm not going to say parents, it's every district.
Right. Right.
But when I'm getting, like 1 or 2 students a month coming to me for tutoring from all over the country for AP, and these are the good students, by the way, that come for tutoring. They're the ones who are like, I can read and I can do stuff and I can write, but the teacher's not teaching the class. What do I do? And I would talk myself right out of a job because I'm saying, well, I could teach you the class, or you could go on Khan Academy, which is at least mapped to the college board, and teach yourself the class, and I'll teach you how to write the essays. But the coursework, you can go through and do it like this. But how sad that we're paying tax dollars for people to go to school, and this is what's going on. So it is a disaster in terms of subject matter expertise of
Yep.
epic proportions.
And all of this stuff, this just even the philosophy of this is stemming right out of the College of Ed.
That's right.
These professors. I mean, let's kind of in light of Matt Walsh's new movie coming out, Am I Racist? We profile Robin DiAngelo, where we highlight that she pops up a lot. Not so much white fragility, but some of her other work, which is infused with critical race theory, of course.
Yep.
But she pops up a lot in courses, and people forget sometimes that she's a College of Ed person. She's a College of Education person. So she comes up, and you got to remember that's where she's part of this and whatnot. But it's a whole philosophy that is then trickling down into everything because it's best practice, and these teachers are being trained up in it. And then besides that, you have administrators or future administrators who are going to these College of Ed programs to get their doctorate or master's, etc. And the higher up they go, kind of like a crude rule of thumb, the higher up they go in degree, the more likely they are fully steeped in the theory, the critical theories.
Well, sure.
And that they
you
are
get all the way
believers.
to PhD, and now you've got to publish or perish. You've got to do some kind of research. And, that's something else that I try to talk about this on the channel quite a bit, but the entire field of education research was invented. Quite literally, it was invented to justify the existence of these graduate degrees in education. And nobody, near as I can tell, has stopped to say, why are we experimenting on children without the parents' permission and without the children's permission? And yet that is what is happening. Every time you see somebody who's a PhD for education, they have to somehow do their research. There has to be some kind of research in a classroom or with actual children. Now, sometimes they'll have the parents say this is okay, but more often than not, whether it's University of Pennsylvania, Rutgers, some of these universities, they just send people into the classroom to start teaching stuff and see what happens.
Well, and it's even worse than that. If you want to have and Deb, you know this because you've talked to me plenty. Yeah. If you want to have a real adventure, start looking at dissertations that you can find in education. It is ridiculous because these, by the way, word of warning, these things get passed off as best practice. Yes. And you'll read these dissertations and be like, well, I interviewed 3 Black teachers in this one school. What's even worse than that is when they do an autoethnography about their teaching experience in a low income or whatever, fill in the intersectionality standpoint. Let me highlight this because I mentioned before our DEI hiring report, and on this vein of
is that that's on the site?
Yes, it's just literally DEI hiring.
Okay. I'm gonna go find it.
The big selling point coming from Linda Darling Hammond and et al. Is that minority students really only learn from teachers that look like them. Now, ponder that just for a second. What if you said, well, only white kids can learn from white teachers? That would be vehemently, and I would agree with you, racist. Like what is this? This is like 1930s in the South? And so I find it insulting to all of the brilliant minorities who have been highly successful regardless of what the teacher looks like, because a good teacher is a good teacher, period.
That's correct.
Okay, so where did that come from? So I actually did the legwork and went and backtracked. So one of the big authors on that push was a guy who's a professor currently at Stanford. and he's there with I don't know if you ever talked about Joe Bowler on your show, the
Oh
math.
yeah.
Okay, so he works with her. His dissertation for his doctorate, in my opinion, was so riddled with variables it should have never been passed. Like he never should have gotten by. He based his work, so his conclusion was is that, well, based on all the evidence that he's seen from the report that he used, white kids learn best from white teachers, but benefit from black teachers because they learn how to be more anti-racist. And black students really only learn best from black teachers and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so where did he get his research? From a 1980s study of Tennessee, where they went around the state and they picked schools. This guy did, and he collected data from classrooms on these students from K to third grade. But there were so many variables, like they lost schools in the process. Kids changed schools over the 4 years. They had no males whatsoever in this thing. Okay, no male teachers. Sorry, no male teachers in it. It was just a hot mess. Let's just put it this way. It's like one of those papers where you're going, like, their conclusion should have been, I don't know.
Right.
And so they went. So if you want to have a fun adventure, start backtracking where this stuff comes from, and you'll find out that all they're doing is engaging in. They start with what they want to have as their narrative, and they just fill in the whatever info
Absolutely.
sounds
It's
good.
almost exclusively anecdotal, and
Yep.
social science research is sketchy to begin with. I mean, there are ways to do it quantitatively, but you have to be very disciplined, and you really, as you pointed out, you've got to identify your variables and reduce their number and have some controls and all kinds of things. They don't even attempt that. There's nothing to even call what they do research is a lie. I would say, I would have said a stretch, but it's straight up a lie. It's fraud. And what's scary to me is that we have a public school system in particular that is taxpayer funded, that hires teachers who are taught based on, that some of this so-called research, this fraudulent garbage, is best practice. First of all, they're taught it's research at all. Then they're taught that this so-called research is best practices. And at no point in time is anybody providing oversight to stop it. It just gets worse and worse every year. And what's so funny to me is parents have more oversight over them every day as the teachers coming in and the teacher training programs have less. So the more, parents are like, oh, what did you feed your child and how many hours of sleep did they get? And let's take an SEL questionnaire to find out, if you're
Mm-hmm.
an abusive person, and are you pushing their religion on them? And are you using gender normative, blah, blah, blah. And are you saying their pronouns? And we can lie to you about their pronouns. So parents are being treated like, I mean, we're just, forget idiots. Like, we're dangerous to our own children. Meanwhile, people who've been fed a bunch of snake oil garbage, it's like so far removed from the reality of how actual children's brains work, what their actual emotional needs are, what the importance of knowledge and competence to their self-esteem. Things, by the way, that we've known for over 100 years, if not longer. If you want to go back thousands of years in terms of classical education, we have known what children need in terms of being strong and competent and clear thinking and so on for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But certainly in the modern era for over 200, if not 300 years. And it's like, forget that. Nope, we're not going to do that. And I'm seeing things come out of these teacher colleges that would make some, dark ages weirdo, believer in witchcraft seem sane.
Yeah. Well,
It's nuts.
On that note, the Columbia Teachers College has a program on spirituality and SEL.
Oh yeah, I've showed that on the
So
channel.
yeah, I think it's like, hi, how much closer can we get to you just admitting that what you're doing is you're pushing these kids into some sort of religious, I don't want
I'm
to say
looking
cult
for
per
the
se, but
spirituality. I want to show this to people just to make sure if they've missed it
Yeah.
before, because it is absolutely, it's the Spirituality Mind Body Institute. This is a real thing, you guys. This is an Ivy League institution. This is at Teacher College. And it exists to integrate spiritual life into our society. Did we or did we not say that this was not okay in our public schools?
I know, and now they're pushing it in as best practice.
No, they're tying it in, folks, with mental health and wellness. Now,
Yes.
people, we can have a conversation on how much it benefits human beings to have some, spiritual life or whatever, but that was never the purpose of school, unless it was specifically a religious school that was,
Hmm.
you, the parent, signed up to have the teachers take care of your child's spiritual well-being. Catholic school, Christian school, Jewish school, whatever. That was what you signed up for. You said, yes, I would like this, please. And I would like it to be aligned with the spiritual, values that we have in our home. But this is public school. It's supposed to serve everybody. So which spirituality exactly will they be picking? Yeah, that's the problem. It's not okay. And yet, if we question this, well, we don't want our kids to be mentally well.
And by the way, that's what they're training these teachers to do, both in the programs and in professional development. Because let's not forget, let's actually, maybe it's something we glossed over, that for those that don't know, teachers, in order to keep their licensing, they have to continue going to school. Now, it could be professional development inside the district, or sometimes they go out to other sources. A lot of them continue to take master's courses. They may not finish a master's per se, but that's another way that they move up the pay scale. And there are school districts where their pay scale, after X amount of years, if you still are stuck in your bachelor's, you just get no more pay raises. You're stuck, like zero. Like, not that you don't get zero, but like you get no more increase. Where if you get a master's, now you're still on the trajectory moving up. And even state-wise for certification, you have to do X amount of hours, et
And
cetera,
they
et
get
cetera.
tuition reimbursement sometimes. So the district, that
Yeah.
means taxpayers, again, will be paying for them.
Yes.
The taxpayers do pay professional development fees as well if it's one of the approved courses, and they'll get that paid for by us. And they go to school to learn more of this garbage. And as you pointed out, the higher up they go on the education food chain, it's not just that they make more money, but they get more steeped in this ideology. They get to be real true believers. And I brought this back up again because we looked at Portland State, right? And I'm sure there's still people who are going to tune in and say, yeah, I know you said it's everywhere. And I know you said it's, that, but we shouldn't think it's just, but it's Oregon. Let's look at Mississippi. I think a lot of people think of Mississippi as being, it's so conservative or whatever. Here we have this elementary social studies class, and we have, social, political, cultural, global agendas on all this, and then changes in society, blah, blah, blah. It- This is it. This is not what you would think of still as a social studies class. Then we have here of the more social studies, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. They've got to read Mississippi. So
You want to hear a scandal? So this came out in the news a little while ago. Go back out and go to Idaho State. Go to Idaho State. So this is another red state, right? And so forth. And so these courses,
oh my God.
so this module. So here's the story behind this. A recent report came out from Baltimore County, Maryland, that these teachers had kind of figured out a glitch in the system, and Idaho State was starting to offer those modules for $50 a piece. Okay, and the teachers were getting the credits to boost them up the pay scale, and the district was paying for it in multiple ways, because they were paying for it because they were paying for the courses. So you can see which one is it the diversity, equity, inclusion course that has all the whiteness and garbage in it.
Yeah.
So the district is paying for the teachers to take those courses, And then the district is paying because all of a sudden these teachers are jumping like 60 credits. They're jumping like 2 or 3 brackets on the pay schedule. So the district is these teachers were, and it's an article. Parents would have to go and if you do Idaho State University and then Baltimore County, Maryland schools, I think you'll probably find it. It'll populate.
Wow.
So there's also scam involved in this, but even more so. I mean, look what they're learning in these modules, right? They're walking away with this stuff. And yes, you and I both know there's probably individuals, like let's say I'm still a teacher. I'd be like, yeah, button, click, click. Yeah, I did this course. Okay, whatever. But that's old guard. These new young 20 or 22-year-olds that are going into the classroom steeped in this stuff, and they came out of the high schools steeped in this stuff. That's how you end up with, well, I'm not going to out your child who I just turned into a transgender kid in the GSA club because you might be an abuser.
Well, and let's remember too, these are supposed to be teachers, and here's a course on restorative justice. And one of the modules is trauma-informed restorative practices. You're
Yes,
not a shrink.
correct.
Parents, if you're listening right now, the term trauma-informed so dramatically belittles what trauma actually is and what it takes to truly understand or be informed about how to deal with it, how to recognize it properly and not project it onto a kid and misinterpret. And then you don't want your classroom teacher getting inside your kid's head. They
And
are
these
not properly trained. This is very dangerous.
and these teachers, again, reminder that they've what, let's be generous, 2 semesters of some sort of ed psych type of courses, right? 2 semesters at best, probably one. And now if you go through the report, you might find some of these courses where, like you said, they might spend a week on Piaget, right? They might spend a week on
At
worthwhile
most.
at most. They're not reading Hirsch. I think I might have saw E.D. Hirsch once in all of these once. Doesn't mean he's not being taught, but at least in all of these syllabi, once. So these teachers, they're not certified to engage in the type of stuff they're engaging in. And Abigail Schreier talks about this with her latest book, right? She talks about a parent she talked to whose child was receiving professional mental services from a professional. And then the school teacher and the school's SEL programming was jacking the kid up.
Yep. And the other thing you'll notice missing when you look through all of these different curricula that Rhyen has assembled here is you're gonna notice an appalling lack of ethics. What I mean by that is there's not a single ethics course anywhere in here. Now think about what a teacher does, the responsibility a teacher has. And we don't do that enough. We don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the privilege associated with getting paid to have access to however many dozens of brand new little people who are other people's children, and you are one of the people who will shape the adult they're going to be, the thoughts that they have, the knowledge that they have. I remember when I became a teacher, that was one thing I was so mindful of. I used to be very deferential to parents because I felt like this was an enormous responsibility. A huge trust was being placed in me to safeguard the most important thing there is, which is their brain and
Mm-hmm.
and what they would use it for. And yet we have teachers who not only act entitled, like to the job itself, just to get the paycheck, but these courses with this activism focus teach them that it is actually their responsibility to disregard what you and I were brought up believing was that important responsibility to be deferential and study ethics and understand the ethics and the do no harm kind of mindset. They don't learn it at all. And they are told that it is absolutely essential for them to trample all over whatever the parents are doing if it doesn't agree 100%
Mm-hmm.
with this garbage. And so I really try to drive this point home to parents because that's the big pushback you get. You're hurting the teacher's feelings, or you're disregarding their expertise, or you don't know, where did you get your teaching degree? And these kinds of attitudes are relatively new. And but when I say relatively new, and within the last 30, 40 years, this has ramped up to the point of now parents, you might as well be just breeders. That
Mhm.
the whole institution looks upon of education looks upon you as adult who needs to be marginalized and shoved to the side. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are not given any professional ethics. They're not given any standards of professional ethics to abide by when they get hired. Um, they have their professional standards in terms of, what's going to be breaking the law in the most literal sense. But I don't know if you remember when you started teaching, when I started teaching, we had a code of ethics that included neutrality. It included not indoctrinating the children,
Yeah. And
being very careful about talking about our personal lives.
and if you go back to the Portland State, that you don't have to do this, but if people go back into the Portland State piece, the full report part, in there somewhere, maybe right at the front, it talks specifically about the teaching is political. It should be bold typed somewhere, that teaching is political. And that comes straight from Friday, etc. By the way, I want to go back, since we're on the mental health side of it, real quick. Something interesting that I learned, because Peter McLaren is a big, he's a professor. He actually, I have a syllabus of one of his. He was a big Friday fan too, and he wrote a book, a compilation of stuff. Something I learned from this book that was really interesting was that they admit that after Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and Friday had time to see it, like, how does this affect actual, this model? How does this affect? He found that that the kids were getting really violent.
Yes.
That they were the oppressed actually wanted to violently overthrow the oppressors. And that's why he came back with his other books, right? Pedagogy of Hope, etc. And what they talk about in this book that I'm referencing is that he also realized in modern language that they had to inject the program with social emotional learning to try to keep these kids, the ones that they told were oppressed, from going after and destroying the oppressors.
But it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't, because look what's happening on our streets today, right? Look, no. I mean, and look what's happening in our schools with the discipline stuff and so forth. And so it's so sad, because, we used to teach, you and I, we used to teach, if we did anything, it was some level of character ed, right? But it was a universal understanding that, like, if Billy gives you this dirty look, you need to learn how to ignore it. Or we would teach them appropriate ways to handle this, right? I'm doing this with my own children right now, because it's a process that children go through. Instead, what we're doing is we're telling these kids, come back to microaggressions and even macroaggressions. We're saying, interpret a look somebody gives you with the worst possible motives.
But period. only if they come from a certain background.
Yeah, so, but I've seen them. They're kids, though. They don't always discern that, and they
no, the kids don't. But the teachers.
What we're teaching them is, well, if this group gives you this look, exactly. but in practice, what happens with the kids?
Rhyen, white gaze.
But yeah, and what happens is, like that student I had at the middle school who would, any kid in the class that gave him a dirty look would tee him off, right? And so the irony is, there's like, well, we're teaching the kids resilience. No, you're not. You're teaching them to be offended by the mere look. The kid may have smelled something funky and made a look and just happened to look your way, and you interpreted it with the worst possible motives.
Well, what's interesting is when I've called people out on this and they talk about the resilience, they turn it into, like, this is when they think they're God, because they'll say, no, we're giving them up by teaching them about microaggressions and then doing restorative justice. We're giving them opportunities to develop resilience by exposing them to discomfort. So they employ this Skinnerian idea of, we're going to make them intensely uncomfortable. And then we're going to teach them the strategies to overcome the discomfort. And yay, go us. Aren't we awesome? And it's like, Yeah, you're not God, and you don't get to do that. That's like not how it works. So we were talking
So
about like, no,
we're gonna
God gives me opportunities to be patient. That's how I,
yeah.
develop patience. Yeah, you're not God, and this is not your job, and you're not supposed to harm people in the hope that you're gonna like teach them how to put up with it. What is that? That's abuse.
It's like adding 5 extra steps to screwing in a light bulb. Like just screw in the darn light bulb. Like what?
Well, you don't
Kid,
control
hey
all the
kid, listen.
variables. You don't control all the variables, and
Yeah.
so what you're doing is you are actually, um, you're teaching kids to have less distress tolerance because it's not organic.
Hmm.
You're giving them an out, and the out is I go cry to an adult and say that I've been offended. I say that I've been, harassed, abused, whatever. This is a microaggression. There's always that I go to the adult sets up the
Yeah.
restorative justice circle, and now there's a solution. When you and I were coming up, somebody gives you a dirty look, and mom and dad were the ones teaching us how to deal with it. We then were on our own. And it was kind of
Right.
known. You don't go cry to the adult. That makes you kind of a
Yeah.
tattletale
And
worm.
in the boys in us boys back in the day, there were a couple different ways to handle it. And if you handled it kind of with a poor choice of let's say a fight,
Right.
there were consequences. And,
That's
and
right.
it might just be a social consequence. Maybe you didn't get caught, right? But you know what it's like? I just thought of the analogy that's probably more apt. When I grew up playing baseball at the local park, it was as you would see baseball today at the major league and college level, high school level. There's two coaches on the right, like on the sideline, and you play the game.
That's right.
When my nephews were younger, let's say a decade ago, I went to their little league baseball game and they were in second grade, and there were as many adults on the dang field as there were kids. And they were pitching, they were catching, and so on. So that's what this is. This is like taking, simple things, letting the kids try to figure it out of themselves, holding them accountable when they make the wrong choices, right? And now we're interjecting adults, and it comes back around to what you said. They start to rely on the adults to solve all of their problems. And when you project that out down the line, we're going to have a society of adults. We already do, where they fall for a campaign about joy.
Joy, right. And I did this whole show a few weeks back on one of the pieces of curriculum, professional development curriculum they have for these teachers, put out by the AFT.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I shouldn't say it's put out by the AFT, promoted by the AFT. It's put out by another organization that is designed around handing the teachers lesson plans to go to the kids and have them evaluate themselves based on how
Yes.
happy they are.
Mm-hmm.
And how much joy they have and how much they matter to other people. And they're starting with the kids with autism.
Oh, jeez.
So imagine, you're going to these kids like, this is what it looks like to be happy. And they show them pictures of what, this is what happy looks like. And I'm like, that's what? So before we're teaching kids to superficially judge people based on race and their gender, this and that. And then now we're teaching autistic kids who already, they really do need to learn that you can't necessarily judge a book by its cover. Don't be so literal. And so you actually have to learn some of these nuances and ask questions. There are other strategies if you can't read by, and they're literally going, here's a flashcard of happiness. What expression is this? This is a happy expression. What expression is this? Sadness. What expression is this? And that is so superficial. And then they have joy. And of course, joy is the goal. You should have more joy in your life. So they're literally teaching a bunch of children how to mask.
Yeah.
Quite literally, like, this is what joy looks like. Oh, and I'm supposed to have joy or I won't be successful in life. So, I mean, I could not possibly write a recipe for how to abuse children better than these universities and colleges are. They're just not calling it abuse. And why I call it abuse is, we think of abuse as, somebody's punching you or they're cursing at you and screaming at you and calling you names. I personally think it's abuse of a child when you deprive them of agency and you lie to them. So those two things, if you lie to a child, whether it's about your motivations or your intentions or about facts and reality, that you are depriving them or stealing from them the opportunity to learn the truth about the world in which they live. And that to me is abusive. And then if you put ideas into their head or tell them how to think and deny them agency, you're setting them up to literally fail when they encounter reality and have to make a decision on their own, and they don't have the capacity to do it, either because they lack the skills and the knowledge, or they lack the inner strength to just weather the conflict. If I have to make a decision, it's like, they can't do it.
Yeah.
That to me is abusive. You're denying the child the right to grow up.
Right. And when I was in the classroom, it didn't matter if it's middle school or high school, we talked about choices all the time. And too often choices or consequences tends to go with a negative connotation,
Yeah.
but consequences are positive, right? And we're depriving the kids of a lot of that. Now they'll say they're doing that in restorative justice, but
Circle
maybe,
time in a bag of chips is not a consequence. Kids are smart.
Well, especially middle schoolers, by the way. Middle schoolers for sure. This, you might disagree with this, but if you took restorative justice and you used it I worked with a counselor who came from from juvenile, right? So he was working with 10 kids intensely day in and day out. They were in that facility. That might be the right type of, maybe not perfectly, but that might be the right type of approach for those 10 kids, right? But then you try to scale it in a school of 300 middle schoolers that go home in the evening, who, are making TikTok videos in the bathroom, who are, we had an 8th grade boy who instigated a fight between two girls so he could film it to get new followers on TikTok, right? You're throwing all those dynamics into this. And when you sit down and have a little private chat with them about their choices and the consequences thereof, which there really aren't, they're middle schoolers. They just won. They're going to go back and they're going to do it again because that's the most of the consequences they're going to get.
Well,
right?
And their morality is driven by consequences. They're at an age, we know, in terms of the development of morality, where it's consequence driven. They don't think like, a more rational adult where, it's like, I should be good. But they're not rational.
Right.
So,
well, they don't have, their prefrontal cortex is in the process of being developed. And that's that long-term thinking. They're very, very prone to risk taking, which is a evolutionary, like a biological thing that's important for their age, right? When you look at human history.
Right.
And I think that our current school system, I think it's not set up to deal with that. And so what they're doing instead is they're hijacking the mental processes of students to let's come circle back around to the report, is they're training teachers as an activist pipeline who then go into the schools and take advantage of the brain development of children to turn them into little social justice activists. Example, the whole paper straw thing, if I'm not mistaken, that came from an 8th grader's science fair project.
That's right. Right.
I might be slightly off with details.
Wrapped in paper to paper straws wrapped in plastic.
And now they're finding, I heard a report very recently that the paper straws are actually worse because they're bleeding chemicals into your drinks.
Of course they are.
And so that's kind of the idea of what they're trying to do, because this transcends, like earlier I referenced A-Rock and their pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas stuff, but this is climate stuff. You have the Sunrise Movement is in your kids' schools. By the way, we have a report for that. We covered a report on these clubs and so forth, and the GSAs. By the way, the GSA clubs, the GSA network specifically says that its primary mission is social justice activism. Right? That's their primary mission.
Is that why you guys send your kids to school? Did you pack your kid up for kindergarten this year or whatever and say, go become a social justice warrior? I'm so excited.
Oh, totally. They can't read Three Little Kittens That Lost Their Mittens, but they can go out on the street holding a sign.
I think it all started with rainbow fish. In fact, I was going to do a show about that, about the books I hate and why they need to be banned. And yes, banned from schools. I mean, you can go read it on your own if you want to raise a little socialist, but I honestly think that rainbow fish is toxic poison. I think that some of these other books like that, where, I mean, think about the sick, disgusting message of one little fish has these sparkly rainbow scales, and he's got to rip his own protective scales off his body. Those things don't grow back, by the way, and give them away. And why? Because other ugly little fish come up and go, I don't have pretty scales like you. I want one. Give me one. And it's like, okay. And it gives all his scales away, except for like he gets to have one left. Well, what happens when another fish comes along? Is he supposed to die? Does he have to give away his one last scale because that's the most important value? Is just like, just kill yourself, it's whatever. This is what we've been teaching our kids for a very long time, that like, you don't matter except as you matter to other people. Well, after a point, who's other people? You know what I mean? It's like, which other people? If everyone's giving themselves away to other people, then who's deciding? And what these teachers have been taught in these programs is that it's this certain group of kids in the middle don't get to decide their own fate because they're oppressors. And I just think whether the teachers are evil or they know what they're doing or not, the net effect is evil, Ryan. It's the net effect is it's hurting a lot of kids. It's hurting the country because we actually need people who can, do things and know things.
Well, and maybe this isn't a terrible thing. I mean, I'm all for people, making the right choices for themselves and their children. So let me put that up front. But we're seeing that, especially with the white male population,
yes,
the college attendance is going way down. They're not going to college. Now, what does that mean? I haven't investigated. So maybe that means that the trade schools are blowing up, and that would be fantastic, because we do need more electricians and linemen and et cetera out there. And so I encourage, if your aptitude is to work with things like that, plumbing, et cetera, go for it. You're going to be better off. I'm mentoring a young man that I coached in college, and he's kind of figured that out too, and he is killing it doing what he's doing with the trades. And so is his brother. But at the same time,
now this is in schools.
Oh now? Yeah, they have some clubs around the country. Yep. These guys are in the schools. So is the DSA has a youth club program. The DSA is the Democratic Socialists of America. Who else?
Okay, I gotta ask a question.
Sure.
And this goes back to that ethics thing. Parents, do you not think that the teachers going into the schools should be political? They certainly shouldn't be partisan. They look at this. If there is a Sunrise Movement club in your public school, aside from the fact that it's communist, I mean, hello, that's pretty obvious. But they're making specific political demands, and they're going into the school and recruiting your kids. This is taxpayer-funded facilities, taxpayer-funded supervisors, educators, advisors, whatever you want to call it, probably using materials from inside the school. And worst of all, recruiting within a public school. So they're going in and using all of this access to your child to do their political activism within this environment. I personally believe that children should be safe from this kind of stuff until they're adults and can make their own decisions, because it is pernicious. You go into an environment where the teachers are already coming in from teacher colleges, pushing notions of activism on kids. And then we just so conveniently have the activist club ready and waiting for you, little sixth grader or whatever. That has got to be a violation of something. Please tell me there's a law or some kind of...
They're protected by law. Or legal precedent protects them from they are allowed to have these clubs, because there's legal precedent behind it. That's why the GSA clubs, they have it all over their literature that they are allowed to have these clubs by law. Now there might be some, like they have to have a sponsor, they have to have X, Y, and Z. We uncovered through FOIA the GSA clubs, the gender sexuality clubs. There was a whole network in Illinois. And this, again, the parents can find this on our website. Through FOIA, we found out that there was an entire network of teachers and administrators and members from outside nonprofits involved in a GSA adult networking, and they would share like the bathroom policies, and they would share and by the way, there was a doctor from Lurie's Children's Hospital involved in this. So when they had questions about how do I give students, by the way, I'm not kidding you, how do I get students in my GSA club chest binders? That was answered in that group chat. So these clubs are very much becoming an activist ground. And I want to share something else on the college front. Because you know me, I track this stuff. There are individuals that maybe they track it a little bit better, but I get the gist. The Ivy Leagues have for how long prioritized radical left-wing activism in getting into the schools, right? I mean, I don't know how intelligent David Hogg is, and let's leave that out of it, but I think, in my personal opinion, and I could become dead wrong, but I think part of the reason he got into Harvard is because of his student activism. And I've seen multiple students over the last couple of years where their resume builder to getting into these Ivy League schools, not because I'm not saying they weren't smart enough to get in. I am not saying that because I don't know their grades. But I think that I can tell you that there's a pattern of behavior by the Ivies to prioritize social justice warrior activists, because all these young 20-year-olds right now who are leading all of these activism things, the Columbia stuff in the spring with the Israel stuff being, shutting down campus. One of those young women profiled by the New York Times or whoever it was, she was one of those. Yeah. She was one of those, she was a hardcore. So I'm coming back to the school clubs. They were hardcore activists in school. And then all of a sudden they're going off to Ivy League schools or very big, like a UC Berkeley or something.
Well, it gets them in. I mean, I'm an essay coach, a college essay coach, and they have, because of the Supreme Court decision on, affirmative action, they have to get all cute about how they're going to figure out who's what and where and why through the essay questions. So they and then they can say, well, no, we didn't discriminate based on race, or that we accepted them because of blah, blah, blah. But you read these questions for these universities and it's like, I always see what you're getting at. It's like every student comes from a cultural background and has unique cultural experiences and unique the community work that they've done in the community for the community, And so I have students who come to me, and most of my students are Asian. Their parents are very, obviously they're paying for an essay coach. They're very motivated and all that. And these are kids who often do something in the community, but it's not activism, right? Generally speaking, it's something more like, I read to the blind or whatever. And they come and they say like, well, I don't know how to answer this question. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to this doesn't feel like, and it's worded in such a way that it's made pretty clear. It's like to make the world a better place. It's not just what have you done in your community to help people. It's this loftier social justice goal, and they are stymied. How do I answer this? What do I answer? Or with the cultural background question or your unique upbringing or whatever. I've had students say to me, I don't want my essay to be all about I'm first generation immigrant from China. I don't want my essay to be that. That's not actually who I am. It's about me. Yeah, okay, sure, but I'm me. And I've told them multiple times, then write that. Tell the truth. And at least you'll know that the school that admits you wants you and doesn't just want some specific activist resume. I'm very honest with the students. And believe it or not, a fair number of them appreciate it. They appreciate that someone is hearing them be frustrated with this stuff. Like I said, I don't get the students who love it. So the students don't go for essay coaching, at least not for me, when they look at these essay questions and roll up their sleeves like David Hogg. Let me tell you how I fought against gun rights. They don't want an essay coach, because remember, they've been told their whole lives that their essays are perfect. They're just fine.
And they're struggling at the college level. I mean, the remedial courses are through the roof. And coming back to this College of Ed report, our goal was just to obviously to expose and highlight what is going on in these colleges of ed, and to show people that what's the root of a lot of this stuff. K-12, we're not teaching critical race theory. By the way, parents, yes, they are. Go to our website. You're going to find plenty of schools that are explicitly teaching K-12 students critical race theory. They're Coachella Unified or whatever, Coachella Valley in California has multiple courses with CRT in it. But I don't know about you, but let's say a senior class. If we had an honest education system and you had a senior course where they were teaching critical race theory and John Locke, and they're teaching all this stuff, and they
even just Thomas Sowell.
Yes. Because I had a junior teacher at a Catholic school, and he ran our world history course like a college course. He's like, you guys are all going to college, I'm going to run it like that. And we read the Communist Manifesto, but we also read, we read Plato, we read Machiavelli, we read, Adam Smith. We went back and forth, and I couldn't tell you to this day where he lied on his opinions on those things.
That's right.
Because that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to allow us to explore those different things and then push us to identify why we believe what we believe and what is the truth.
Well, it's like Gary says here, teach these kids to think, to figure stuff out. That should be paramount. That is why I wanted to be a teacher in the first place. And then when you realize that, no, you're a presenter of other people's values and ideas, which, by the way, you better agree with, or you're not going to progress in this job. I didn't want that job anymore at all. Yeah. That's why I left. So that's not a job that anybody who really thinks for themselves and wants to do it right is going to stick with for a whole career. I mean, I know there are plenty of brave souls out there shutting the door and trying to hold it back and trying to do their best, but even they're getting increasingly frustrated by the lack of physical safety that they experience. And you and I have talked about this, that teachers are at physical risk of being beaten up and killed and all kinds of things. There are a fair number of parents who are on board with all this junk that the teachers are learning and back up those teachers at school board meetings and various other events. So if you're trying to teach a different way, you're going to have parents on you. Your administrator is going to be on you. You're not going to get any backup from pretty much anybody. So you're all by yourself. It's an incredibly demoralizing, exhausting experience. And then if you're very unlucky, it can do worse. They can sue you. They'll do all kinds of things to you. So people people who look at this and say, no, I don't want any of that professional development. I don't want to do any of that in my school. They're being driven out. So the other function of the pipeline is to flush out all of the olds, right? As Mao would say, the old teachers, the old values, the old history, all of it. So that pipeline is like a friggin' hose on high power, just pushing the rest of us out. And it's not, I don't know what the percentage, did you find in your research, the percentage of teachers at this point in schools? I know we've seen the how, 40 grads will affect, hundreds of thousands of students, but what's the percentage, do you think, at this point in the public schools of teachers educated this way versus educated a different way?
I think sometime soon, we're going to start to see critical mass start to gravitate towards the critical pedagogy side of things. Because, I mean, let me back up a step, because I want to give parents a little bit of hope here. There are we the nice thing about our job is that we do get contacted from even administrators, sometimes superintendents. One of my coworkers got sent a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act to a district in New Mexico, and the superintendent responded saying, "We're not doing any of that crap here, and we never will." And so there are school districts. I know there's a couple here by me in Tennessee. There are school districts where they and their board, they're not doing this stuff and they're fighting against it. Yes, they have teachers on the inside and they don't necessarily fight those teachers, but they do make it incredibly difficult on that end of things to want to even stay there. Listen, we want you here, but this is how we're doing it. And if you don't like that, if you don't believe in that, then there are other jobs in other districts that you can go work at and do those things there. And I think that's how this starts, right? And one of my big taglines from when I coached collegiately, it was our program philosophy with my young males was, that we always we make today better than yesterday.
Mhm.
And we brought that all the way down to the micro level. Make this play better than the last play. Make this choice better than the last choice. You can do that however you want, but I use that myself, and especially with the work that I do is, if I can expose one more thing today than I did yesterday, if I can get this information to one more parent today that I
Yes.
didn't have yesterday,
Yes.
right? And we just, Erica Senzi, my coworker, and she's fantastic, and she always does this on Twitter. Plus one, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, one more person, and
No,
I think
that is exactly right. I really, I'm so glad you said that. And it's kind of like a perfect sort of lead in to sort of wrap up the whole show, I think,
Mhm.
because what you've done with this report, like with all your reports, is put information out there. And I bring it to this channel, and hopefully, audience, you'll share this with other people. You can share the report directly or share the show, whichever you think your particular friends or relatives or whatever will benefit, will like to digest first or second or whatever. Um, but the goal is just, one more person every day who gets woken up to this. And that is how
Mhm.
we beat this back. I truly believe that. And I also think that in terms of Parents Defending Ed, that's how you guys have been working is, as you pointed out, there are some schools. Now, what I want parents to hear is, okay, well, if one school can exist like that, where they're pushing back, or there's a superintendent, or there's a principal, or there's somebody who's saying you but not you, or you can be here but you can't do this, then that means it's still possible that,
Mhm.
not every look, I'm maybe 58, but you're younger than I am. So we exist. I talk to people every day just like you do, and it is heartening to hear, one person here, one person there. I'll get messages in my inbox saying, I want to be a teacher, but blah, blah, blah. So these people exist out there. And there are ways that we can reach them and empower them and try to, support them so they're not alone against this mess.
Yeah.
So things to think about, and I'm sure you guys are with your law fair and different things, you're thinking about it too. Things to think about are how teachers are credentialed in your state. So if you're something you're thinking, I want to do something, okay, check into how the teachers are getting credentialed. What kind of courses or degrees do they need to have? Maybe you need to talk to your local lawmakers about changing that,
Yeah.
because they teach at the universities that which is required to get the credentials. And that does go in a little bit of a circle. But if you change the credentialing process, there's not really much of an incentive for people to pay to go get these credentials. Okay.
And let's give a pause. Let's use it, because this is the other thing I didn't talk about with this report. Is it's also for parents, well, for anybody. Let's say there's a parent whose child is going off to college and they do want to be a teacher, and we want good teachers out there.
Yes, we
Definitely, we
do.
want use this report as a kind of like a scouting report. My 25 years coaching, and that's what plays a big
Mhm.
role in this stuff, because to me it's a scouting report, right? So here's your scouting report, people. You look at this report, you study, and you learn the language, and then you start to investigate the schools that your child is interested in, and so forth. And you start to use this, any of these reports, not just this one. You use that as a tool for you as you go through whatever process. In this case, in our analogy, is going off to College of Education. You know, because there are good College of Educations out there that are not pushing this stuff, or you know, there might be a course in there or two, and you know what, you can figure it out. The last university I worked at, by the way, because I'll give it more, a little bit more hope, a little bit, is that in 2021, that university was starting to purge a lot of their woke majors. They actually cut their gender studies program. And so, and that's a big teachers college, by the way. They're one of the bigger teacher colleges in the Midwest. And so if that private school is willing to take the hits to start to purge that. So, by the way, the president of that university, at least back then, I don't know if he's still, his tenure might have been up, but he knew exactly what all the critical theories were. He taught a course on that stuff in college, and he knew it in terms of he didn't agree with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the point is that, so coming back around, is that use this report to help aid you as you refine those searches and try to figure out where to go and where not to go.
I would also suggest, because with more and more parents waking up to this and more interest in smaller private classical schools, micro schools, and other alternative avenues to getting an education, which are going to become increasingly popular, charter schools, there are different, possibilities. Look, if your child wants to be a teacher, definitely consider sending them to, or suggesting that they go to, a liberal arts college to become a subject matter expert, to be a scholar
Yeah.
at something that is. Why do you want to go teach a subject anyway? I mean, theoretically, you're going to teach, even elementary school, you're teaching kids to read, you're teaching kids math. So, you don't need, believe it or not, you really do not need to go to a teacher college or even a graduate school of education to teach someone to read. I'm a homeschool parent. I did go to graduate school of education, but my undergrad was in liberal arts. When it came time to teach my own children to read, I availed myself of exactly nothing for my graduate school program because it was utterly useless to me in terms of teaching a human being to read. I could go, there are umpteen books you can go just buy at the bookstore to learn how to teach phonics, alpha phonics, how to teach your kid to read in 100 lessons. There's so many good ways to do it before they ever darken the door of a school. And you can send your child to a school like St. John's College, for example, or they read the great books. Then they become a subject matter expert in one of the subjects, even science or math. And then look for a job in one of these other schools. Even public schools, if we can get it together to change these credentialing criteria and get those praxis tests back and working, so where you can go and just prepare for your praxis tests and maybe take a couple classes in instructional design and classroom management, they will be 10,000 times better teacher than somebody who goes through the programs that Rhyen has shown us this evening.
And there are states that are certifying people now.
That's right.
It's happening more and more. They're certifying people if you're an expert in your area, maybe even have a little bit of work experience in that field. Like especially the STEM stuff, because there's just not enough people with STEM
Leverage the teacher shortage to your advantage, to your child's advantage. There is one. And so if you are somebody who comes out of a school like St. John's or one of the other, Hillsdale or someplace like that, and you're like, oh, well, I'm an honors graduate from this school, or you can go teach at the Socratic Experience, right? Michael Strong's program, which, by the way, I highly recommend. And if you are watching this and want to enroll your child and you click the link down below, you can get a 10% discount. These programs hire people from these schools. So there are good teachers out there, and there are people who want to teach, and there are people who could even be hired into your district. So like I said, if you are active in your district, go start pushing for them to hire, to be diverse, and hire some teachers who are subject matter experts and bring them in on some of these alternative certification pathways. and you might balance things out a little bit with some of the activists.
And private in many states, private schools don't require
That's right.
teacher certification. Now, might make it a little tougher, but if you have a passion, like I spent time teaching at a Catholic high school, and there was a lot of things I loved about that. Yes, the pay may not have been as good as being in the public schools, but there's
Right.
a trade-off. There's always
Yes.
trade-offs, and
Autonomy is
I
priceless.
it was, yes, very much so, and we were, as long as we stayed within the things that we had to teach, right, and so forth. And so I would say, you kind of do your homework and look at all those things, and certainly, our reports at defendinged.org, all that stuff is there for people to use to their advantage, to get educated, and to see what's going on in their neighborhood and their universities, and so forth. So,
Yep. Yep. And I noticed that Patrick LaBelle, you remember Patrick? We did that panel discussion with him.
okay, yeah.
Patrick is in the audience. He says, I love teaching, but I could not stand most of my colleagues because he was in STEM, physicist, and a college professor, disgusted to see the indoctrination even in the STEM classes. So it is in every subject, including PE. I noticed that Leaving
Oh,
Kids
yeah.
Alone mentioned it's even in PE. And so we parents have to, using these resources, we have to go and you know get involved. But I like some of the suggestions that you've made, rather than some of the other ideas that people have had of, like I said, you can yell at the school board all day long, but they don't hire the teachers. So you've really got to go up the food chain a little bit and talk to the people who handle the certification processes, what goes on at your state university and things like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a process. You have the
Yeah.
accreditation agencies who, I mean, people don't know this, but Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, she's on multiple
Yeah.
boards of these accreditation company or organizations, these nonprofits. And
Yep.
so these people have, it's kind of like the more you zoom out, that you come back to the same handful of individuals who are kind
Yep.
of, I know it's a bad analogy, like it's overplayed, but like the little puppet masters and stuff, and they obviously have only so much control. But I think there's truth to that. Their ideas filter down, right? Their ideas and their ability to influence things and so forth. And so it's
Well,
going to take time. It's just going to take time for us to keep at it. Here's the other thing, and you know this because you've done the work. The progressive educators, Dewey, all the way through to now, they've been at this for how long? 100+ years? We've been at it for how long? Like really at it, at pushing back 3 years?
right.
It's gonna take time, and that's why I always come back myself every day. How do I make today better than yesterday?
Yep.
And if we just and then we make that a long term, we have to have 100-year outlook.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like what do we want for our grandchildren
Right.
down the road, right?
Well, and I think it's really important to remember that you're not likely to get this stuff out wholesale. So, using their own arguments against them is one strategy that if they want diversity, they need to live by that. And we need more diverse teachers, diverse ideas. They
Mhm.
cannot continue to monopolize the ideas, and say that this is the only thing they're going to teach these kids, especially when there's nothing behind it that shows that it works. So another thing that I would suggest is check out some of the reports on Parents Defending Ed about the results, actual student outcomes, in terms of whether it's test scores, whether it's, how many kids can't read, because when you really drive that home that the kids are not succeeding, and don't let them get away with blaming it on mental health, okay? There are kids in war-torn regions who are learning how to read and do math. You don't have to be perfectly mentally well. Is it advantageous to not be stressed out by things? Of course. But it's not a prerequisite to learning. It's
Right.
just not. And they'll lie to you and say that it is. And that's why they have to front load with all these icebreakers and hand holding and emotional checking in and everything. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. Nothing builds self esteem quite like competence.
Yeah.
And our kids know they're not learning the material. And so if you parents really focus on that, on their academic competence, and push back on the fact that there's one voice in the school and you're not seeing a lot of diversity, and just ask for this. I think it'll be more effective to ask for what you do want than to keep fighting what you don't want. I'm not saying don't fight it. I'm just saying that if that's your only angle of approach, they tune you out. The power, as you pointed out with Randy Weingarten, the power isn't so much any kind of actual tactical powers. They've crowded out other voices.
Hmm.
They so dominate all of these positions that nobody else gets a word in edgewise. There's nobody else represented. And so the more, as you point out, vote with your feet, go to different colleges, vote with your feet, go to different schools. If you have to move to a different district. If you know that there's good teachers over there, or a principal or a superintendent is running it better. If you can't do that, or you can't get over there some other kind of way, then show up
Yeah.
and start asking for what you want. That's the only thing I can
Yep.
think of. And like you said, better if you can't get it at the school, give it to your kid yourself. That's your last line of defense, is give it to your kid yourself.
And I want to add that American history is riddled with people who were illiterate and became literate, right? Just numerous beautiful stories of people of all walks of life who came from nothing, had nothing, and were able to make themselves known, and so forth. And that's what we should be teaching our kids if we want to teach them resilience, and so forth. And so if you want to advocate for stuff inside of your child's school, I would say start to figure out who those individuals are, and if they're not taught, let's get them taught. If you want to do SEL, I don't want to even call it that, but that would be the right messaging to send our kids. Is, look, no matter what your issues are in life, what your home
Yeah.
life is like, everybody has some level of garbage. Even if you think it's the most perfect home, there's something there. Maybe it's too good. I don't know how that would happen, but anyway, like, why is that a bad thing? I don't know.
Well, it can
But
be if you don't experience any kind of problems. You
sure.
can get all the way to adulthood living this sort of charmed life, and that first thing that happens is going to hit you like a brick. So
Yeah,
it
well,
can be.
then you weren't prepared, right? Like, I mean,
No,
and
I
I'm not
agree. I
blaming the
agree.
parents.
But
I'm just saying that.
well, what I'm saying is, if parents, if you think like, oh, look, we've done this amazing job and everything, it's like, well, you still have to prepare the kid for the possibility that things. My dad used to do that, and although I had plenty of problems in growing up, sort of socioeconomically, we didn't have those problems. And
Mhm.
so he used to tell me all the time, this isn't yours. Like, not to be mean, but the likelihood that you won't be as well off as an adult as you are as a child is very real for a host of
Mhm.
reasons beyond my control and your control. So you need to be prepared. And at 15, he was like, you need to go get a job, like, now.
Mhm.
And no fun in the summer for you. Go get a job. And I remember thinking, you're so mean. But it is the best thing he ever did for me, because it turned out to be true. He was right, and I was ready. So
Yeah.
that's it. You're right. You do still have to prepare your kids. So if nothing else, you take away from this show and what the teachers are learning and whatever, is look at the gaps and figure out how you can fill them. If you still need to use the school in your district and this is what's going on, then
Yeah.
find the gaps and figure out how you and your
Yeah.
community can fill them.
Well, and that was how I coached, with my athletes. Was we would always talk about, it's not the things that we can prepare for, all the scouting reports, everything. It's the things that we can't prepare for.
Right.
Injuries was a big one with us, and that happened
Yep.
to us one time. And I'll tell you, we were in a really important match, and one of our key players went down injured, and because of how we trained and how we prepared the guys,
Yep.
those that came to fill in did a fantastic job, and we still were able to be successful. And I think that's a powerful message that we
Yep.
can be sending to our young people, is that our schools are not. And you look at this monoculture that is being this activist pipeline stuff, and they're not training these kids in that mindset. They're training these kids that, how am I oppressed? What's my critical consciousness, right? Like, Like, all these fancy terms. Parents, don't let those terms scare you. It really, it's just is how I have I pulled a slide one time from something, and I forget, it was like, assume that racism, or assume, you fill in the blank here, but assume that racism is everywhere every day. Like, could you imagine living your life that way? And they're training the kids to do
Yep.
that. And so what's the counter to that? Is, how about you make today better than yesterday? Right?
Yep.
How about you learn to adapt to whatever happens today? Do you know, when I worked on the farm, my family farms, and I did not grow up on the farm, but I was farming, and you don't know how to deal with your combine catching on fire until your combine catches on fire, right? But luckily, the amazing farm hands that have worked for my stepfather forever and a day, they knew exactly what to do, and within minutes they had that. Anybody that's ever farmed, combine fires, not good, especially in the heat of an October dry season. And so anyway, but you don't know these things. You don't know what you don't know with this stuff, and we're not training our kids to do that. We're not training our college, our future teachers to how to weather real adversity. We're
Yep.
just showing them that, we just want you to be activists and go out and change the world. You know what I mean? And it's
The
like,
world you
holy,
don't know about at all because you didn't learn anything about it.
I mean, it's like, holy crap, you want to change the world, but you can't even get your own bedroom in order, right? Like, you can't even get your own self in order. You
Right.
you get offended by every little look and wrong pronoun use, but somehow you're going to save the world from climate change. Like,
Yep.
give me a break, man.
I think the other thing that gives me hope, on the parent side, you got like Parents Defending Ed and people like you. But I think, believe it or not, there are a lot of creators out there and teachers, if you're listening and you think, like, I'd like to do something, and I'm a little bit tech savvy, but I don't know what. There are teacher creators and even other average citizens who are creating really cool like Instagram accounts. And I don't do TikTok and I don't like TikTok, but I've heard there are some over there too, where they're putting out really intelligent, fun, engaging
Good.
little bits of
Yeah.
content about history, about, government, about politics. I saw one that was like the truth about Karl Marx and what a dirty, filthy, rotten jerk he was, whatever. But
Big time.
believe
Yeah.
it, if you really want to combat some of this, since we're not getting it in school, is go where they are. And we
Hmm.
know where they are, and the good teachers are having a devil of a time getting them, off the phones and away from social media. So leverage it. I mean, that's what I would love to see is some of the teachers who had to leave, who were like, God, I can't stand this anymore. Is like if we could pull our energies and make some really fun, cool, like remember Schoolhouse Rock?
Hmm.
With those awesome things that we learned about the Constitution and all the stuff. Imagine somebody putting something like that together, but for the more, modern savvy audience, but like poking holes and fun at all of this junk. It's an idea whose time has come where, I mean, I see that, like PragerU you does videos, but that's for an older audience. You know what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
I'm talking about this sort of snarky, sarcastic little things that there's a guy on YouTube, I think it's History Oversimplified. Have you seen those?
No, I have not.
Oh my goodness, you guys, the one on the Russian Revolution is hilarious.
I'll have to go
They
check it out now.
Oh, you got to check it out because they take Lenin and make Lenin and Marx like they look completely ridiculous, exactly like the little jerks that they were, but it's oversimplified, right? So it's short, it's compressed, but it's accurate and really entertaining. And it's that kind of stuff that, share with your kids or think about ways to produce it in short little bite-sized pieces. And believe it or not, I think we could make some headway because then kids will go into class armed with some of this stuff and just be
Hmm.
like, yeah, I know how that bell hooks. Yeah, she's what? Like
Right. Right.
it, hey, they did it to all of our heroes using
Yeah.
this stuff. So turn around and do it back. I'm all about meet them where they are and where the teachers can't stop them from seeing it.
Yeah, and I really, I don't want to discourage parents from having, their kids read some of the stuff that we talked about. I mean, go back and look at some of those book lists and, especially when they're mature enough, right?
Yes. High
And
school.
have them and read it with them, for crying out loud. Read Pedagogy
Right.
of the Oppressed with the kids and go, okay, so what's wrong with this? And if you're a Christian, my family and we're Christians, full exposure. So, we would sit down and go, okay, now how does this compare to the Word of God, right? Like how is this biblical? To sit there and whine and complain about the things you don't have. Oh, no, 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 that's Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, Cain killed his brother because he was upset because it wasn't good enough and he was jealous and resentful and all this other stuff. So, there's all kinds of great lessons to read that stuff so your child knows that stuff, right? They know what's
Yeah.
coming at them,
Yeah.
but you do it with them. So,
Yeah. We're just gonna have to. We just have to get more involved. That's all there is. But I am so glad. I'm so grateful actually that you came and joined me for this because I was going to do
yeah,
it by
thanks, Deb.
myself. And there's now looking back, I'm like, what the hell was I going to do by myself with this report? I mean, I would
You've
have
been
gone
fine.
through it and looked at it, but you were able to explain, what you found and where we should look. So everybody, please go look at the report in detail. Share it out with other people. Be aware of how the teachers are being educated. And that's what you need to know is what's in their heads is what walks into the classroom. And so we can look at curriculum all day long or look at the book list or the books in the library, but let's face it, one of these teachers educated this way could take my handy dandy copy of the Declaration and Constitution, be like, so these dead white men sat down and wrote a bunch of junk. Yeah, this is garbage. Let me
It's
tell you
just
why this
paper. It's just paper.
it's oppressive and it's dated and it needs to be updated. So they could say we covered the Constitution and you'd never be the wiser. So that's why you need to look at this report. So any final words or anything else you'd like to add
No,
before we
just,
sign up?
you can reach out to us if you have anything that you want to share or if you need help with, and we'll do the best we can for you and or get you to the right people. And
Yeah.
you can find us at defendinged.org, and
Yeah.
you can find me on Twitter at my name, so pretty easy.
Yep. Oh, did he freeze? We had a perfect broadcast and then Rhyen froze. Anybody else frozen? Uh-oh. I hope it's not me. Rhyen, are you there? Oh no. Okay. Um, I guess we're frozen. Thank you everybody for watching and I really appreciate it. Thank you to the audience. I'm sorry I didn't go through all of the chat, but I was trying to like pull things up as they came up. I just wanted to give Rhyen a chance to go through the report. I have no idea what's happened to the broadcast, so hopefully everything's okay. But thank you to Rhyen and thank you to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.